Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Monday, November 15th, halfway through the month, and we are almost to the end of the year. Cannot believe it. We have an amazing lineup on today's show. We get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Harry Wan, who is the head of security at a company called Britiv. And Harry and Alan do a deep dive on cybersecurity, which is what Britiv plays in, especially the ransomware landscape, and also some predictions for the next year based on various data research points from outside Brita. And they also provide some guidance for organizations in defending themselves against attacks. This is a great basic cybersecurity conversation and ransomware conversation, so definitely one worth checking out. After that, Alan speaks with Tal Kane, I think it is, who is the co-founder and CEO of Velocity, and they discuss the rise of on-demand production-like environments, an interesting idea. Accelerating feature to market velocity is important in obviously in this fast-paced software delivery cycle, but how can organizations speed their development and at the same time drive better quality? Well, I'm glad you asked, because Tal and Alan talk about why we should be shifting our developer experience to on-demand production-like environments. Interesting idea, interesting concept. Interesting conversation. All right, after that, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. And this is part one of a two-part conversation that host Mike Jones has with Deirdre Diamond, who is the founder and CEO of CyberSN and also founder of Secure Diversity. And they discuss a number of topics related to cybersecurity, including the role of CISOs, also hiring and job searching, and inclusion and diversity. All important topics in cybersecurity, and one that I don't think a lot of organizations pay as much attention to as perhaps they should. So this is a great conversation, and as always, Mike has a fascinating conversation with his guests, and this is, as always, no different. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Cloud Native Days with Kubernetes event, and this one features Nicolette, aka Nico Graham, who is the Observability Product Marketing Manager over at Splunk, and Dave McAllister, aka Dave MC, and he's a technical evangelist at Splunk, and they talk about the 12 immutable rules of observability. This is a great conversation between the two of them that really does go over some of the rules organizations need to understand with their approach to observability, including the impact of open and flexible data ingest and instrumentation, and so much more. I'm not going to go through all 12 of them, but it's a great presentation and definitely one worth checking out. After that, I come back. I've got the news headlines for you. And then I have a conversation with Stephen DeVries, who is the founder and CEO of Arius Risk. And he and I talk about threat modeling for the developer community and how Arius Risk is actually making it free. They have made their entire threat modeling database free to the developer community. It's their way of helping do their part to mitigate cybersecurity risks and close up the vulnerabilities that exist in a lot of code. It's a great company, it's a great technology, and it's a great conversation, if I don't say so myself. After that, I have a conversation with Jaron Bradley, who is a Mac OS detections lead expert at Jamf, and Patrick Wardle, who is an Apple security expert and founder at Objective-C. And we have a discussion about Mac and Apple security, and it's one of those fallacies that the Mac OS is impermeable, and I think we've all discovered, especially over the last year or so, that that is certainly not the case. So we discuss some of the biggest malware attacks this year that have impacted Mac systems, and also dive into some of the unknowns of these malwares strains and how users can protect themselves from future threats. So, it's a great conversation, very, very eye-opening as well, especially if you, like I, am a Mac user. So definitely lots of takeaways in this conversation. After that, I've got the webinar's preview for you, and then Mitch Ashley comes on with his Analyst Corner segment. In this one, he speaks with Jason Needham, who is the CEO of Cloud Entity. Now, Cloud Entity just recently put out a State of API Security survey, which is freely available on the cloudidentity.com website. But they discuss some of the findings from the report and recognizing that APIs increasingly are the attack surface for concern for both security and software professionals. APIs play a major role in software development these days, application development, and connecting systems together. Definitely a surface that is ripe for attack. So Jason and Mitch discuss the findings of the survey and maybe some takeaways also from what organizations can do to help protect their API security. After that, we have The View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Weaveworks CEO Alexis Richardson, and they discuss GitOps and how it will give rise to app stores in the enterprise. That is a really interesting idea, and as always, Mike has great conversations with his folks, so I'm sure this one is no exception. All right, that's today's lineup. It's a great one, and we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. Kicking off today's Techstrong TV broadcast is a conversation between Alan and Harry Wan, who is the head of security at Britiv, and they have a cybersecurity conversation, particularly the ransomware landscape, and also offers up some predictions for the next year based on some various research data points that Britiv has collected from other organizations, and they also provide some guidance for organizations in defending themselves against attack. This is a great conversation, one totally worth checking out, so please do. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another segment of Techstrong TV. My guest this segment is Mr. Harry Wan, and Harry is with a company called Britiv. If I mispronounce it, Harry, I'm going to ask you to correct me.
Hi, my name is Harry Wan. I'm with Britiv, and we help companies manage their privileged access in the cloud.
Excellent. Harry, thanks for joining us today. Harry, what's your role at Britiv?
Yes, I'm head of security, so I have two major responsibilities. One is to secure the Britiv app that our customers use, and the second one is to secure the Britiv corporation against attacks and malicious actors.
Oh, okay. So you are defending your own network as well as making sure the app itself is secure.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Got it. And you gave us sort of the one kind of sentence of what Britiv does, but can you elaborate a little bit, Harry, in terms of what you provide via your app to the clients?
Sure. Britiv allows you to, in a centralized location, manage the privileged access to the various cloud resources that many companies are now accelerating their usage of.
Yep. And look, I have a few friends who actually are in this space, and just to highlight again for our audience, it was very different when we were in a LAN or a WAN, and you had Active Directory that served really as identity and access control. As we move into the world of SaaS and third-party apps, Active Directory may or may not work with many of them. Active Directory may or may not work with many of the endpoints. People are using to access these third-party apps as well. And so the need for, identity and access control in the cloud, the need to to have really kind of cloud native, if you will.
Absolutely.
Kind of solutions is stronger than ever. So Harry, one of the big stories, I think, when we look back, we're here in November already. When we look back on the year, probably in my mind, there are two big themes for security this year. One was the software supply chain attacks we saw, Microsoft and SolarWinds and so forth. And then secondly was ransomware. Wow, what a year for ransomware, and what a terrible time to have to deal with this. But nevertheless, the bad guys never miss an opportunity, right? To take advantage. So it's been a crazy year for ransomware. And, the crazy thing about ransomware is, though they'll often get in via an endpoint, their real target is not just locking up or encrypting your endpoint, but getting to your cloud resources and encrypting those to bring the organization itself to a grinding halt. So let's talk a little bit about cloud-based ransomware, if you will, Harry, and kind of what you've been seeing, what Brydov has been doing.
Yep.
Interested in your thoughts.
Sure. Actually, I attended a talk many years ago that in 2014, a company called CodeSpaces that has been in existence for 7 years lost control of their Amazon control panel and was demanded a ransom. If they did not pay the ransom, they would be attacked. And CodeSpaces chose not to pay the ransom. And the attackers started deleting their storages. They started deleting their storage elements, their S3 buckets, their elastic storage blocks. And that company actually went out of business. So the second thing I'm seeing in this space is in 2017 to 2018, the North Carolina State University studied GitHub and located over 100,000 access keys in GitHub. Quite simply, an access key is really like a computer-based username password that allows a computer to access cloud services. As a quick illustration, just yesterday, security firm Kaspersky announced that an attacker actually gained an access key to their email service and was able to impersonate emails coming from Kaspersky. And we can talk a little bit about that in a bit. And finally, the last trend that I saw last year, June 19, a penetration test company called Rhino Security published a proof of concept. It was like 25 lines of code called S3 ransomware script that allowed an attacker to encrypt a simple storage service bucket. So my thought is going to be this. We're not hearing a lot about this. If we think about the ransomware guys as the bear will come for the cloud after it finishes gorging on the on-prem guys. And the explanation there is there's a metaphor that you don't need to outrun the bear. You just need to outrun your friend, right? Yeah. And your friend is the on-prem guy. But the bear is starving. He's going to eat all the on-prem guys. Then he's going to come for us in the cloud.
Yeah, agree. So the premise of that, though, is that it's easier for the ransomware guy to hit the on-prem.
Yes.
So I would disagree respectfully in today's world, and I'll tell you why. In a world where most of our workers are remote, work from anywhere.
Yes.
What is on-prem? What's the difference between on-prem and the cloud anymore?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? It's not like the servers are next door in the server closet here anymore. They're not. I'm at home. I go over, in many cases, over the cloud.
Yep.
To go to my, what used to be called, let's call them on-premises, on-prem resources, on-prem, infrastructure.
Yep. Yep.
But I go as easily to my cloud infrastructure as I do to my on-prem infrastructure. I don't think the ransomware guys even, delineate between them. It's storage, whether it's an AWS S3 or a SAN NetApp appliance in someone's server closet. It's just storage. They're encrypting files.
So, Alan, I think the real difference is really where the corporate architecture looks like. Many of the older corporate architectures are still on-prem basis, right? You know, you VPN to an intranet. There's still the soft, chewy center, right? You have a defense perimeter, right? That's what an older architecture looks like, right? The newer cloud native ones don't have any on-prem. So I think a lot of the attacks that we're seeing, the easy, low-hanging fruit ones, still look at getting onto an on-prem infrastructure, intranet type thing, and then launching their attack there so that an endpoint with a bunch of shared drives, it just natively gets attacked. And many of the tools we're seeing don't have some of the native, let's go access an S3 storage bucket as part of their toolkit yet.
Okay, fair enough. You know, and I think that, again, this whole thing with COVID has shined a light on that.
Yes.
Like the whole idea of, you know, being somewhere remote, VPNing back in, and then going back out from there to your infrastructure in the cloud is sort of wasteful versus direct to cloud. And I think over, you know, the coming months and years, we'll see less and less of that. Like, I wouldn't be buying a lot of VPN licenses right now.
No, but many of my friends in this business are helping these companies with these older type of infrastructure move to the cloud, right? But you know, a lot of those moves are over spans of many months or sometimes many years to get them to be cloud native.
Yeah, and I think there's an argument to be made that for some organizations, it'll be hybrid, right? They'll have some cloud stuff, but they're not going to just lock, stock, and barrel move everything. So, Harry, let's talk about advice for people watching.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this two general kind of advices and a deep dive into one that is really along the bright solution, right? You know, some general advice for my friends that are defending would be, number one, know which cloud your company is using. Sometimes that seems like a simple thing because you think about the big cloud usages, right? That you walk to the VP of engineering and ask him, what cloud are you using? Can I inspect it? Can I put some tools in there, right? But a second thing to do is to talk to your CFO and examine the expense reports, because many cloud offerings are paid for by credit card. And you would be surprised sometimes what cloud your company is actively using. I just did this exercise internally and had to go and ask some people, what are we using this cloud service for and what data are you putting on there? The second piece of advice is that as defenders, we're always always instructed to say, you know, look at what data is in the cloud and what the data risk associated with it, right? I'll offer the following observation, that the value of a credential is directly proportional to the value that the data that credential can access. Meaning, once you know the high-risk data, you should inventory the high-risk credentials that are attached to that data. And then once you understand those kind of high-risk credentials, my advice would be, let's look to the Cloud Security Alliance for a little bit of help in what to do here. The Cloud Security Alliance is a nonprofit organization established in 2008. I actually ran the Los Angeles chapter for a year and participated with them. They published a cloud control matrix, a specific set of controls that will help you defend in the cloud. And they recently went from version 3 and they published version 4 in June 2021. The identity and access management controls expanded from 13 to 16, with 3 of the controls specifically calling out privileged access management. So let's talk a little bit about how Brightif helps with 2 specific ones. IAM 9 and IAM 10, I'm going to summarize them, says segregate or separate the privileged access users and apply additional controls to them. And IAM 10 specifically recommends that if you grant privileged access, grant it on a time-limited basis. So what that means is, if you're using Azure and AWS and GCP, take all the privileged access, grant them somewhere else. And then if you grant them only for a short amount of time. So let's kind of compare this with the Kaspersky attack and see if we can get some understanding. So Kaspersky lost control of a access key to their email service, their simple email service hosted by Amazon Web Services, okay? The attacker with this key was not able to access many resources. It was only able to use the simple email service. So we know that the access key was not given overprivileged, which is a very, very good thing that they did. However, they did not time limit the access to the validity of this key. So because of that, this key would be able to send email for as long as that key existed before it was invalidated. Brightive allows you to apply technical controls to the most important identities in your cloud. And the identities not only for the users, but for the machines, these access keys. And finally, the core of our product allows you to grant access, these privileged access, on a time-limited basis.
Got it. Excellent. The time limiting thing is important because, obviously, right, it limits the exposure of how bad this can get. Though once they're in there, that's a whole nother story. Harry, so, we're coming to the end of the year. As we said, ransomware has been a big story. What do you think in the coming months? Do you think ransomware continues to grow or to become, as a menace like this? Or do you think it kind of settles into the background?
I think ransomware is going to co-evolve with where the data is going. So it's going to co-evolve to the cloud, right? And ransomware is all about the money. And the money is all about the data. As the data moves to the cloud and more people become cloud native, those tools will evolve to be more cloud native, and our defenses will have to be updated to be more cloud native, right? The bear is going to go to the cloud, right? And there's a whole bunch of defenses in the cloud control matrix, and identity is going to be a key element to defending against the bear.
Agreed. All right. Harry Wine here today with the story of the bear and ransomware. Harry, thanks for joining us on Techstrong TV. Great interview. Keep up the great work at Brightive. And let's hope some people take this. Actually, for people who want more information and maybe do want to act on this, where can they go to find out more about Brightive?
You can go to brightive.com.
That's BRITIVE, right?
That's right.
Okay. .com.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. Really appreciate it. Good to be here.
No problem, Harry. Good luck to you. Say hello.
Thank you.
Harry Wine Brightive here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back. Next up, Alan has a conversation with Tal Kane, who is the co-founder and CEO of Velocity. And they discuss accelerating feature to market velocity, which is so important in this fast-paced software delivery cycle. But organizations are grappling with ways that they can increase their velocity, but at the same time deliver better quality. And Tal and Alan talk about this topic and why we should be shifting our developer experience to on-demand production-like environments. Interesting idea, and it's an interesting conversation. So let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview. We've got a new company and an entrepreneurial CEO to introduce you to today. I want to introduce you to a company called Velocity and their CEO, co-founder Tal Kine. Is that how you pronounce it, Tal?
Yeah. Tal Kine.
Okay,
nice to meet you.
Tal Kine. Tal, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too.
Nice to have you on our show. Tal, you know what? As I said, it's the first time a new company to our audience. So if you don't mind, why don't we start off, give us a little background on Velocity, and not only that, but we're lucky to have you on as the founder. Kind of what was your motivation? What was the passion that drove you to found Velocity? And let's hear the story.
Sure. So thank you for that. Actually, I will start with myself a little bit. I'm coming from a techie background. I've been doing software development for probably from the age of 12. Instead of like a paintbrush, I got technology, which was awesome. I feel like still I'm in a toy store as a grown up. I've been to several different startups, and I love doing development. I love working with engineers, and the whole story of Velocity comes from the fact that we felt a pain by ourselves, both me and my co-founder, Kobe, which is also coming from a technical background. We saw that in so many different companies, and we felt that this pain should be solved. And when we started kind of like the process of like doing this ideation together and trying to find how can we empower people, how can we empower developers, we kind of like thought that it would be a good thing. And there is kind of like a founder fit to how can we allow people like us, developers like us, empower their work, make them work faster and in an easier way while they're still enjoying doing their work. And it was super important for us to kind of like impact other people and help them achieve more at the same time. That's kind of like it. I would say that Kobe and myself actually met in our army service when we were approximately 19. So we know each other for 18, 19. We kind of like best friends for the last 13 years. So it's kind of like exciting to actually take this journey together and like build this amazing company with an amazing team together.
Fantastic. Let's talk, if you don't mind, I'm going to dig in a little bit to help our audience understand.
Sure.
So you said that, as developers, as technical people, you saw a pain that you experienced firsthand, and then others experienced it too. What was that pain? What was the problem that was kind of perplexing you?
So the idea of like how developers are working, it's kind of like a pipeline. It's basically starting from you developing something on your computer, basically testing that, building that, and then deploying that to the what we call production, or the actual application that the customers is seeing in front of them. Like think about companies in Netflix. The whole website is the production. And in order for not disrupt production, developers are not working directly on what customers are using. They are creating like other environments, something else, and another environment that they can basically work and test a dev environment or a staging environment. And they can make changes over there. And once they are done, they can deploy that to production. And one of the problems that many companies struggle to do is basically to make sure developers can deploy to production as fast as possible. So right now, it's a huge pain, mostly because they need to kind of like orchestrate that and make sure that they can do that as fast as possible and in a high quality that won't disrupt the customers of the company. And at the same time, doing that as fast as possible. And one of the problems that we saw was the fact that in order to basically get to production and to make sure that the same thing that they develop on their own computer will work the same way on production, they had to create something that was as close to production as possible. So staging and dev and all these environments do not come without cost. You actually have to maintain them. You have to make sure that they are not drifting away from production, and they have like the same context. So you will know that once everything ticks here, it will also tick the same way in production. And having all these environments is a massive pain for companies. And from Velocity's perspective, after actually talking with so many different companies, so many different developers, and actually having this pain by ourselves, we basically understood that everyone is having the same pain. Everyone is kind of like building their own way for replicating environments. And no one had like a a complete solution for having this production-like environment in an easy way for developers. So Velocity comes in and say, instead of like trying to maintain both production and other environments, developers or DevOps and SREs should basically maintain production, and Velocity will take the analysis out of production or the definition of production and create ephemeral environments for every developer. So basically, in a click, you can analyze production, create this blueprint of what is production, and then allow every developer to create their own production-like environment. You can work with this environment, you can test it, you can crash it, and then remove it and get the latest production-like environment for yourself. This is an amazing way for developers to have more independence for themselves.
So Tal, obviously we are the people behind DevOps.com, right? And so I started DevOps.com in 2014, 2013. And back then, the biggest tools in DevOps were Chef and Puppet.
And Ansible.
Right.
And that, what you're describing is I think what a lot of people thought Chef and Puppet could do, which is, look, you take a script or a recipe or whatever you want to call it, and I could duplicate configurations and settings and environments, machine untouched by human hands in an automated machine-like way.
Right.
Now, I think what happened is,
Kubernetes happened, and that really changed the game for Chef and Puppet.
For everyone.
And everyone, right? And so you talk about an orchestrator. But isn't that something that,
like, doesn't Kubernetes, or I thought AWS had like Snap or whatever it's called, where I could do an instant clone
of an environment? Or is that just environmental, but not actual software configuration?
So that's actually a fantastic question. I will start with what is an environment. Environment is not just the application, it's the context, it's the data. Like, you need to see the data for a specific snapshot in time, kind of like a little bit what VMware we did with a revert to snapshot in a way.
And at
the same time, that's exactly it. And at the same time, think that the environment is also a third-party resources such as SQS, SNS, and even if you're using Twilio or MailChimp or SendGrid or any other resource, you're not done with the environment only with the application itself. The environment should contain everything for you to actually know that it's going to work the same way. So for your question about Ansible and Puppet and Chef, you're right. I've been there as a kid or as a grown-up. And to be honest, you have to remember that when you use these tools, you basically set up the environment, and then things can change on this environment. So they are not atomic. And you have the data and you have some state of the application that you need to make sure that you are going to kind of like replicate the same way. So even if you're using these tools, there is still like data being created and the state is changing. So you need to kind of like find a way to replicate this state to make sure that everyone is starting from the same points. Kubernetes got in, containers became the de facto standard in a way. And now you can say, okay, I can create this blueprint or like state that I can start from. But again, it's not enough because it's also the data, which is super important. And at the same time, the question is like, how do you know how to set up the environment? How do you know how to set up Kubernetes? And the next question will be, who is this person? Like, developers not necessarily would like to focus on defining Kubernetes resources or Helm charts or actually activate them. They would like to have all the environment ready to go for them to focus on a very specific component. Like you can kind of like compare that to what serverless try to achieve. They say, listen, you should focus on a very specific thing and everything else is ready to go.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So from my point of view, from Velocity point of view, we're saying we're going to give you everything ready to go. You don't need to care whether it's going to run on Kubernetes or Fargate, GCS, anything else. We don't care about that. You should focus on what you're trying to change right now and assume that everything else is ready to go. So so hopefully I managed to answer the question, but the idea is that to kind of like start from where you would like to begin doing the development and not just setting up the environments. Did I manage to answer your question?
Absolutely. The third-party stuff, all of it.
So my next question or area that I want to touch on with you then, Tal, is, today's environments are changing by the minute, by the second, by the hour,
Right.
How does velocity, just because I'm going to use the word snapshot, but it's not a snapshot, right? I'm a developer. I have a velocity image that I did yesterday. I come to my desk today to work. Does velocity update the image for me?
Fantastic question. Thank you for asking that. There are two parts of it. One, the question is think that when you have your environment running, one thing that we want to make sure that you can update the environment when you choose to update the environment. So we don't want the environment to change for you if you didn't ask it for. So that's one thing that we are covering. So you can choose, this is my environment. I would like to get the latest snapshot and update that. The second thing is that every time that you deploy to production using your CI/CD system, we are integrating with your CI/CD, whether it's GitHub Actions, CircleCI, and every other Jenkins or any other CI/CD system. And we can report to ourselves, listen, there is a new deployment, there is a change in how production looks like, and we are updating the blueprint accordingly. So every time that you create a new environment, you can choose, give me the latest that was just deployed to production. So you as a developer can always know that you're getting the latest. And if you already have an environment that is ready to go, you can just update that according to the latest blueprints.
Perfect.
Hopefully I managed to explain myself.
Yeah, no, good, very good. All right, let's move beyond the technology a second. Let's talk about company and offering and stuff like that. So Velocity, the company now, it's you and your co-founder. Just to share with our audience, funded, VC funded, angel funded at this point. What's the story?
Yeah, so we started the journey on October 2020. The company actually started on October 2020. We raised our seed round for $5 million from Greycraft and Chetz, and multiple angels. Some of them is Danny Grander from Snyk, Nadir and Evgeny from Armis. We have in our advisory board Prashant from Stack Overflow and from Big Panda, Eric Eisenberg. And we have multiple amazing angels that are part of the journey. Basically, after starting the company, we onboarded 7 customers. Now, multiple customers inside this audience is already paying for the product. We're currently a team of 14 people, and we just closed our A round with Insights, which is an amazing partner. I really, to be completely honest, I enjoy working with them. They are great people, super nice subject matter experts, and they are a great partner for the future of Velocity. So we just closed another 17 million for our Series A. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So 17 million.
17, yeah, 17. Right. Yeah, sorry.
Great. Yeah, great. No, we work with a lot of the Insight companies here. Well, if you're in DevOps and security, you can't help it. They do a lot of companies in DevOps and security.
I think the reason, I just wanted to say that I think that the reason that they're doing that is they have their own perspective about the market. They did their research and they have their own point of view of where the market is going to. And I think that there is an alignment with Insight and Velocity, thinking this is going to be huge and the market is huge. Every software development company, everyone that does software development is going to use Velocity. So we are aligned about that from our
good for you.
Yep, good. Let's now talk about how customers can engage with Velocity. How is the product or service offered, priced? We don't have to get into pricing if you don't want, but how does our audience engage with you on this?
Yeah, so right now we are in a private beta, mostly because we want to be very focused on giving the best experience, developer experience, not just user experience to our customers. So now we onboarded multiple companies. We're going to add maybe several more in order to give them the experience of the Velocity platform. But in the future, we're going towards self-serve, sign up from the website and just onboard yourself to the platform. Basically, the process is allowing the customer to give us enough information, part of it automatically and part of it by them adding to the platform. And we kind of like create this blueprint. And once the blueprint is ready, we can basically let everyone in the company use the product. So it's kind of like starting with the setup, with this short onboarding process, and then moving towards everyone can just download the CLI using the UI and just go ahead and use the products.
Got it. Excellent. We're almost out of time, but for people who want to get more information, the website?
Apologies, can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry, for people who want to get more information, what website should they go to?
Yeah, so they should go to velocity.tech, which is our website. You can see there both the use cases. I would recommend you to just go to the customers page. You can see testimonials. I love the way that our customers are talking about the product. These are our champions, but you kind of like see land and expand inside these companies because they enjoy using the product every day. And this is kind of like exciting from my point of view because we actually give value to people like us, to developers, and we see many other options to expand for other people, for other stakeholders inside the company. So super exciting times, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it is. It's, you know what, as we were talking off camera, being an entrepreneur, starting a company, thinking that in some way you're going to make the world better, you're going to make people's lives a little better. It's important. Tal, I want to thank you for coming on and telling us all, sharing with us the Velocity story.
Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And again, super excited about the future of Velocity. It's going to be a fun journey, to be honest.
Good for you. Good. We'll be watching. Tal Kine, CEO, co-founder of Velocity here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, welcome back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. In this one, Mike Jones speaks with Deirdre Diamond, who is the founder and CEO of CyberSN and founder of an organization called Neurodiversity. And this is part one of a two-part conversation that Mike and Deirdre have on all topics related to cybersecurity, but some very near and dear to both Mike's and Deirdre's heart, including hiring practices, job searches, and inclusion and diversity in cybersecurity. It's a great, great conversation. Please do check it out now.
Welcome everybody to the Haunted Hacker podcast number, let's see, the last one was 100. Give me a number, Deidre, between 100 and 120.
111.
111, perfect. So this is episode number 111. Today we have Deidre Diamond from CyberSyn on the podcast with us. She's going to share a little bit of her journey as well as talk about some interesting topics. Before we get started, we'll go ahead and give an update really quick. The anniversary podcast is coming up in less than 2 weeks on the 30th. We've got some surprise guests. I actually have a guest coming from Chattanooga who's the founder of the Haunted Chattanooga Ghost Tour. So that'd be pretty interesting, something different than cybersecurity. And I speak in Cyprus next week for the National Cybersecurity Conference in Cyprus. So that should be really interesting. This is my first time speaking there. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot of updates. We're in a new location now, so you'll probably see a new set probably next week. Waiting on some new equipment to come in. But once we get rolling, you'll see that. And this is actually my first podcast in the new place, so I'm really excited about this. This is really cool. Unfortunately, I don't have my mic set up and all that good stuff, but we'll get there. So Deidre, tell me a little bit about your background and your journey to cyber, and also thanks a lot for coming on the show and sharing your time with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I love talking about my career only because I want more people to have it. I am one of the lucky ones. I represent the 1% founding CEOs of a tech company. In fact, because I've funded with my own money, I'm actually less than 1%. And I don't want to see that anymore. And so I do like sharing my story. There's no doubt that the experience I had is a big reason why. So grew up in California. I went to school for sociology and criminal justice. I thought I'd be a criminal attorney. Was discouraged just by the nature of being a woman. There was a lot of discouragement around me about it. And so I went into social work. And within my 90 days, I didn't realize that the California law, you could terminate me. And I was writing up management for poor behavior in interacting with these young adults under 18 who were in group homes. And when I got fired, because I went into the room where we all hang out on our breaks, and I saw this book that says, if you see something, write it down. And I did, and I got myself fired. And that was devastating for me at the time. And even though I was making minimum wage, my goal was to really help, in society. And lucky for me, I answered a little ad in the paper. This woman was doing career coaching, and it was the paper. I'm 50, so this is I graduated in '93, and she told me I should be in sales and management, and I didn't even know what the heck that was. And she did. Luckily, I come from a privileged life. My parents were able to give me some money to get some coaching from her. She taught me how to interview, and I found an ad in the paper that said, "Can you think on your feet?" And it was a group of people, small group of people, 2 serial entrepreneurial men at the top. And they hired me entry level and trained and promoted me within technical recruiting for 13 years. We went from 2 million to 89 in 5 years. I was VP in the third, making the kind of money that's crazy and also doing really good business for people. And after 13 years, we were 500 folks, so almost $1 billion. And that's Motion Recruitment today. They're well over that now. Those 2 gentlemen also founded Rapid7.
Oh,
and
really?
Yeah. And Rapid7 had been in business for a little bit. Maybe I think there were 18 people were there when I joined, and I was their first vice president of sales. So I was asked to take that inside sales model, which is really just good solution providing. I don't know how we all feel about salespeople. Anyhow, I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But and bring that inside sales to selling Nexpos. And so I did, and I went from 800,000 to 50 million in reoccurring revenue in 4 years, from 18 to 300 people. I also helped build out recruiting. Sales engineering reported to me sales, and we just had a great time. Did the deal with HD Moore, those types of things, just, really rocked it. And then those founders asked me to go to one of their other software companies that needed a restart, their oldest one, content management, didn't love it, but I did what they needed me to do. Everybody retires, and I'm like, I got to do something out, with I want to get back to what I was doing. And that's when I founded CyberSN. I thought, you know what? I loved recruiting. I loved helping people find jobs. And I loved developing people and running great companies. And so after being CEO of Percussion Software, I thought, you know what? I'm gonna go put the 2 things I love the most, staffing and the cyber community. They're my peeps. They're social servants. They're protectors. They're givers. And they're brilliant. And so I thought, oh, I can help. They can't find each other. I hear all this noise. There's a problem. Let me go help. And that's when I founded CyberSN and realized how broken everything became in the digital era. That's how I realized I was the 1% or whatever percent I am. And I founded Secure Diversity. I built a platform. I've done a lot over the last 7 years to solve some big problems that we have. And I'm a super lucky person to have this story, and it shall not be luck anymore, right? We can't.
Exactly.
We just can't. The training. I mean, if you hear what was in all of that, it was people sticking together, people investing in people creating stories for people, and that's their model, whatever business it was.
Absolutely.
That's what I do.
Cool. Very cool. And our paths kind of, I think, crossed at one point unknowingly until just now. So HD is a friend of mine, and he went to Rapid7, and I actually worked for Mantech International, and I used to do pen tests for Rapid7.
Oh,
kind of ad hoc. Yeah. So that what's that?
We're cousins.
Yeah, distant cousins. And I too remember the newspapers. I actually graduated in '92, so I wasn't that far behind you. But yeah, it's very interesting environment that we live in now. And you're right. There's a lot of people who are very giving, but it seems like the hiring. I've always had a problem with the way that security companies hire people and what they look for, and kind of, the interviewing process has always been a little off in most places. And we can talk about that. Listening to your career is pretty amazing. And, you seem very excited about your career and passionate about what you do. And to me, that makes a world of difference. And when you're giving back to your community and helping people connect with their future, that has to be a good feeling. A lot of fulfillment there. So let's talk about the hiring process and how you bring the people together, and some stories about, the hardships as well as the successes that you experienced in that process.
Yeah. Well, it was shocking to me after leaving the business of talent and staffing for 10 years. Really, I left because I left January of 2007 is when I started at Rapid7, and then I didn't come back for 10 years. It was really the digital era, if you will. And I had no idea what it had done to the staffing business. I thought, I'm just going to do what I do, build my armies. I had 400 last time in 5 years. I can do it again. And hit me right in the face that the digital era had made job descriptions unvaluable. No job description made any sense. And there was no common language in cybersecurity. One person, security engineer, could be 20 different things to 20 different companies. And we couldn't make matches in what I'm used to, which is moving, meaning helping fast. And it really just hit me hard. And so instantly my brain went to, I need a taxonomy. I need a common language taxonomy for every single job that could exist in cybersecurity. And I need it down to the task and the project level. And so I went out looking while we were, doing what we do. I went out looking for that person. I finally found that person. He's currently my chief security officer today. He's been with me 6 years this month. Wow. Him and his team, actually. He came from 21 years of government contracting in the same company, from a defender to a CISO, still defending, the rarest of rare. And yet running into him, he also saw the market issue and was intrigued what we were doing, and he solved this with me. And so we built an internal application that took job descriptions with managers, like, are they going to do this task, are they going to do that task, and then up to any 1% chance that this task or project would be associated with this title, we're asking the question. And so today, we have now a public job building matching system for everybody, but we were using it strictly for ourselves. And that was just super key to being able to make this work, because the common language did not exist. And everybody was stressed out. How much time is getting wasted was unbelievable. I was shocked. I didn't know that's what had happened in the digital era. And it's security, it just has it the worst because it's the newest and the most complex. I mean, we're now at 10 categories, 45 functional roles. You can see it in our career center. When we started, it was 21, and that was 5 years ago. And so, it's not to say that other disciplines don't have the same problem. They do. Ours was just worse because it was newer. It was much more complex. And who's teaching it, to recruiters? I mean, nobody knew
Exactly.
Right? And even the hiring managers a lot of times don't know what they need, even still today. So that was critical for us to build that technology and to be able to do that the same for building a profile. We call it a profile, not a resume. And so, job searching is broken. It's a terribly broken system because of content. Oh, I didn't tell you. So before the digital era, it was $5,000 to run an ad in the Sunday paper. $5,000 in the night. Oh yeah, I would run 3 every Sunday per office, and you get a little space like this, right? And then think about it. First of all, the fax is rolled up paper. Number 2 is like that's it. Once it's run, where do you find it? After somebody throws away the paper for the week or whatever, it's gone. And fast forward 10 years, I come back and the job posting digitally is a couple $100. You can leave it all year, so of course it has no value. You've got that problem, and then you've got HR having control over job descriptions where hiring managers aren't allowed to adjust them. And between those two things, it was shit show.
Yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't believe what I walked into. I thought, this is nuts. And that's why I was like, we got to solve this. And the more I started to do it, I'm like, this is a national security issue. We can't even find each other. We can't match to each other in a day of technology. And I thought, yeah, no. So that is my journey of the last 7 years of solving that. We have solved it. Now it's just a matter of how fast all 780,000 of us are here and getting the Fed in one place too, which I'm working on. And then it's also getting new people in, which is why I founded Secure Diversity and really working that angle. It's a bad time right now.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Mm-hmm.
It's awful.
And when you look at, you speak about diversity, when you think about like true diversity and people in cybersecurity with those, I guess, divergent, personality traits or different mental divergence, it's even more difficult to find a job because you have to interview and you have to create an environment different than most people. Like I have Asperger's, and some of the most overwhelming interviews I've ever been on is when there's 6 people in a room and they're all firing at you one at a time. And it's overwhelming. And I don't think that as an industry, we have been cognizant of other people's needs. I think it's all been about the business unit and fulfilling numbers. HR, most of HRs that I've seen, they have maybe 2 prerequisites to find a candidate, and they just cold call everybody. I can't count how many times a week somebody contacts me wanting to know if I want to be a security guard. Where on my resume says anything about being a security guard? I know. I know. It's sad. It's sad.
And that's for everybody. I've never got a reach out with the title Vice President of Sales or CEO, and I've occupied that role for the last 20 years.
Wow.
I don't even understand how this all happened. I know that even IBM Watson stopped their staffing services because, everybody's matching garbage content to garbage content. So, of course, it's going to be garbage results.
And another thing I truly dislike, and by no means am I racist or biased against other countries, but if someone calls me for a job in the US and I can't really understand them because the accent is so thick, what does that tell you about the company that's hiring this third party to do the hiring? It's so disparate and nothing seems to be molded together like it should be. And right now it's a candidate's marketplace, really. But the problem is that these jobs that they're advertising, the requirements aren't written well. A lot of the people that you contact on the first call have no idea, haven't even looked at your resume. So it's difficult. It's difficult, for newcomers coming into the industry, especially when they don't have a lot of experience and some of them may not have the required skill set. So it's a struggle. And hats off for coming up with a way to improve that. That's huge. Oh yeah, game changing.
Solving searching and matching. Those has to be done with technology, and that's what we've done. And then you're always going to need a human to work with the people where the search and match that was done to facilitate. And, there's more recruiters than technologists at recruiting for technology. I mean, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And again, all industries are suffering because what are we doing? We're all going to one place to search for every job in the world? Like, what? Like, what? We're already in search hell of everything in our lives. And that's how jobs, which are really careers, is another thing. It's like, that whole mindset is it's just a job. It's like, where's the fostering of career in the job system? They counterproductive to each other, the system and the concept. And so, we've also taken this to that level to say, look, we all have to be in one place. And if we're all in one place and there's career support, job support, training support, resource support in a common language, then game over. We won't have this problem anymore. It's going to all come down to emotional intelligence and who retains talent. And I can't wait, because that's the power I'm giving the world, is to say, please stop this churn madness. Like you said, you don't know until you interview if it's a good fit, not good fit. Half the time you don't even know after you interview because nobody tells you. You don't even know really what the job is. It's like that, when that's gone, then people can really settle down and make their bed at a home, So that's what we got to focus on, because our emotional intelligence problem is huge. I mean, that's what I've been speaking a ton about this week. And what we're seeing is so scary. It was scary pre-COVID. Now it's worse scary in terms of burnout and cybersecurity professionals doing 4 jobs. I mean, we even hear the word 4 now. It used to be 2 or 3. And we know why. Everybody went remote. IT couldn't handle on their own. Security had to come in. Then you got SolarWinds, ransomware, pipeline. Oh my gosh. To the degree of 100 times more. And we're in the same capacity of supply, and demand just went through the roof, because every one of the 32 million companies in the US that was not hiring is now hiring because of those attacks and those breaches. And it's
painful. Those breaches are painful.
Painful. And we don't even know about them. I mean, so many of these companies are getting ransomware, unless you're a public company, you don't have this exposed. So everybody got smacked and woken up and scared. And as I tell people, we used to have to do outreach because cyber professionals didn't get the budgets to use agencies. We had to help them fight for it. Now the calls are just coming in, and supply hasn't changed. So it's all going to come down to EQ, emotional intelligence. Who's going to treat these professionals correctly?
And that's the key. That's the key.
That is the key.
Culture, to me, is one of the main pieces I look for when I'm choosing a company. Is a culture and people. I've been talking about this in my talks for the past year, is that the ones and zeros are never going to change. The digital stuff, the technology is technology. It's a box. But what we need to worry about are the people behind those boxes. They're actual people, not just employees, not just a programmer. They're humans with, personalities and needs just like everybody else. But I think as an industry, we've lost that touch, that personal touch as well. A lot of companies I've seen have really been trying to come forward and help, raise that awareness.
Yeah, I mean, you turn on the news and the world's plagued with a lack of EQ, right? I mean, come on, we just take from others to give to ourselves on a regular basis as humans. It's quite disturbing. And yet we're the brightest of the brightest in this field. And so, if anybody's going to be able to do it, it's us. And that's what I tell people all the time. But emotional intelligence is a skill. It's typically a skill that was taught to salespeople, because your job is to turn, no's into yeses, which you're not going to do with anything other than positive energy, kindness, and solutions. And and really, unfortunately, nobody else. And we're suffering from it now. In fact, this week I rolled out at ISC Squared Congress my behavioral standards for inclusive work environments. I've been asked for years to create what is the foundation and the framework. What is it? And it's skills that everybody needs to adopt and can be done. And we're erring on like crazy. And it's not that even the cyber leaders that are erring on it. It's the people above, mostly, who are calling the shots, who are handling the budgets. But again, and not to say that it isn't in our own community, but less than above. And so we see it in the attrition statistics and how often people leave jobs. It's not money. That's not what's happening.
It's environment, yeah.
Yes, people leave people. Of course, they get more money when it comes down to it because you're taking risk. You don't know, and it could be another place of the same or whatever, right? It's stressful. People always want to give people more money when they come on, but that's not what made them take the call.
No. And what's funny is, looking back at my career, I have I have two bosses in the past that I still stay very close to. And one of them I flew to Dallas for a talk just a couple weeks ago, and I haven't seen him in 20 years. And he shows up to my talk, and we got a chance to sit down and talk to each other. It was really cool. But those are the people that make the difference, are the people that make you feel valuable in your environment. And, during the pandemic, there were so many jobs open for cybersecurity. And it was because they transitioned to that work from home type environment. I'm one of those guys that I do the instant response. So I may go 4 or 5 days without sleep, plus the podcast, plus being a board member, on an advisory board for 2 companies, and just plus. And that burnout's real. That burnout's really real. But a lot of us do that to ourselves as well. I know I take on a lot when I probably shouldn't, but I love to give back to the community, to people who want to help out. And there are some companies out there that really don't want to help out. They want to succeed and they want to, have dollar signs, but they forget about the people that are involved with them. So one of the other things I talk about quite a bit is, neurodiversity in the workplace. People with Asperger's or people on the spectrum, they're a little bit different. Doesn't mean their IQ is any less. More times out of least their IQs are probably higher. So how does, let's say, the platform and how your company, how does it address that differentiator in humans?
Yeah. I want to also make a comment on your, being up for 4 or 5 days. Something I've been saying a lot to folks is that, you all are emergency workers, and like doctors and nurses, and they have places to sleep in the office. I know we're not in the office anymore, but we think back to the days where, how are we caring for those emergency workers, and understanding that a protector, like you said, you have to care for yourself, but you're a protector. Like, how do you close the computers or your, terminals when there's attacks and things happening and possibilities that you're seeing? And so, it's very hard to, as a protector, to be like, okay, I'm not going to look right now, I'm done. So we must care at a greater capacity, understanding the nature of being an emergency worker and being a worker under constant stress. The rest of us have constant pressure. You've got constant stress in that you're looking for the attack. Like you're on a heightened awareness of an attack. I mean, are you serious? I mean, other than being a woman and being prey as children, no joke, as a younger, right? That's the shit that goes down. Like I can understand that heightened sense, and oh my gosh. So it's really ridiculous that people don't get that. And so for those of you that aren't, that don't have a place that gets that, find it, because they exist. It's just got to dig through all that stuff. But with neurodiversity and just in general, things that can be really easy for an unconscious bias of an interviewer or a recruiter or what have you. Eventually people have to meet, and so we can only do so much. But what we can do is what we're doing is, so professionals make a profile that is public. So, like LinkedIn is a public profile, ours are anonymous, and I mean anonymous. I don't even know who you are. I mean, again, this is built by security people, including myself with my security. This is, yes, absolutely. And so I don't need to know what you look like to match you. I don't need to know the company you're working for's name. I just need to know the industry. I don't need to know when you graduated. I just need to know if you have a degree. I don't need to know the school. Why do I need to know the school? What the hell does that matter? I don't, whatever certs you have, great. I don't need to know the years. And so when you remove all of that, one can be anonymous and have a public profile and let employers apply to them, meaning their job sent to them, which, by the way, only using our taxonomy. I will not let these cruddy job descriptions just be pinging my professionals that come for this service, which is free. And they can decide, which also helps with imposter syndrome, because, the rejection isn't you. It's,
right.
This profile, if you will, if there is a rejection. So, that's about the best we can do from a search and match that could ever exist. In fact, the federal government's calling it blind recruiting, I found out. And I am very much in those conversations of working, government too, with the platform. And then the rest is, we can't be having recruiters who aren't emotionally intelligent talking to anybody, never mind security people. And we can't be having managers. And we do have actually a pretty bit of a challenge with our managers in emotional intelligence, because a lot of them were promoted without the training of emotional intelligence because they were great individual contributors. And so they're struggling. And, when we're under stress, we're not at our best.
Right. I totally agree. And, the position I took at this company about 4 or 5 months ago, so I lead a blue team and also do red team and also do incident response. But I was put in charge of like 16 people. And I've built teams before, but I've never built a team this large, this fast. And a lot of people aren't prepared for that type of progression, because you really have to understand people, and you really have to understand your own processes and your own thinking. And you have to check on these people, and you have to make sure they're doing okay and they're getting what they need from you. And I think a lot of managers roll into that role as an authoritarian, right? So they think less about their people's needs and more about, this is how I'm going to run my ship. I had to do some promotions, and I had to hire some level 1s and some level 2s. So what I did was I moved 2 of my level 1s up to level 2. And, one of them had been there for quite a while, and the other one, she was, fairly new. But hearing their interests and hearing how excited they are when they get a promotion, that's what fuels me. It's not the authoritarian. It's not making rules and making sure that, we're the best at what we do. No, I want to be the best at what we do, but I also want our people to be the happiest too. But I think that's really key. And another part too, that as far as like today and hiring policies and background checks and all of that, I have a background. I don't have any convictions. As a matter of fact, my charges were dropped. But they had to do with cybercrime, and it's public information. And I had a company, a CPA company, want to hire me to be a consultant and just come in and take a look at their business and how they operate, do a pen test, whatever. But the funny thing is that one of their guys on the security team had found my profile on the internet and found information about me. And immediately it went from, okay, we're really excited to have this guy, he's done all this pen testing, to, we can't touch you because we're a CPA firm and, you've gotten into trouble.
CISO Talk. to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, welcome back. Next up, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Cloud Native Days with Kubernetes event. This one features Nicolette, aka Nico Graham, who is the Observability Product Marketing Manager over at Splunk, and Dave McAllister, aka Dave MC or Dave Mick, a technical evangelist over at Splunk. And they have a presentation titled The 12 Immutable Rules of Observability. That title pretty much explains the entire presentation, but it's a great one, totally worth checking out. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Welcome to the 12 Immutable Rules for Observability. We're going to be talking about a lot of things in this space here. And with me today is my counterpart, Nicolette Graham, who's a product marketing manager at Splunk. I'm Dave McAllister. I'm the senior technical evangelist at Splunk. And in this discussion, we're going to cover a number of different things. We'll talk a little bit about what is observability. And we'll cover a couple of the rules in depth. We're going to look at the data side of observability for this. We'll talk about sampling and why sampling can be a problem in your particular environment. And then we're going to talk about sort of the speed, the scale that can impact your application space and your infrastructure space and bring it back into this. And with this, let's start by talking a little bit about some rules here. So we love to do these things here, and we're going to be talking about 12 immutable rules of observability. There are lots of these things here. So 22 immutable laws of marketing by Al Reyes and Jack Trout, a very famous book here. And there can be even the funny version, 70 maxims of maximally effective mercenaries for this. But one of the things we do know is that sometimes these things are pretty strictly enforced here. And because we're going to be talking about observability, we need to spend a little time talking about what observability is in our space. So observability is our new deep sources of information and data. It's the information that we get from inside of our application and inside of our infrastructures that tell us what's going on and lets us infer the behavior that's going on inside of here. But as we all know, data is only as useful as how it's accuracy, precision. We can aggregate it, analyze and visualize it, and respond to it. Often, this is defined in classes of data like metrics, traces, and logs, even though it can go beyond that. But observability allows us some new insights, new approaches to solving and resolving issues, as well as the ability to respond to things we didn't even know could go wrong. And so we looked at this and looked at how the world is using this new sources of data and broke this down into sort of these 12 rules of observability here. In particular, we're going to be talking about rule number 1 and number 2 here. Use all your data and look at speed and resolution. If you're interested, at the end of this talk, we'll be giving you a pointer to more of our insights around these 12 rules and get you ability to take an even deeper look at the stuff we're going to talk about with that. With that, let me hand this over to Nicolette to talk a little bit about why observability is important these days.
Thanks, Dave, for that introduction. So I want to just take a quick step back and briefly talk about what's driving the need for observability, hint, hint, cloud adoption, and why you need to consider the 12 rules when implementing an observability solution that Dave briefly mentioned, right? So we know that cloud is a key enabler of transformation and increases velocity, so we're able to ship products faster and go to market faster. But it really increases complexity. And this complexity makes it harder to have visibility into everything that is happening in your environment, from your infrastructure layer to your applications, all the way up to the business. So maybe you can raise your hands at home if you use any of these languages or technologies on this slide. I know Kubernetes is a big topic right now. I'm assuming most of you use one or more. And really the further along that we see our customers in adopting microservices, leveraging Kubernetes, containers, service mesh, serverless functions, and all the other cloud native technologies that are really helping to accelerate digital initiatives, it becomes really hard to have that visibility into everything that's happening. So you no longer have to monitor just your monolithic stack and a few services, but you now have to monitor hybrid, ephemeral, abstracted infrastructure and applications that have a ton of dependencies and unique data, and it becomes extremely hard to manage, understand, and troubleshoot. And the reality is that this visibility is really table stakes for ensuring business success. And doing this with a bunch of point legacy monitoring tools just increases complexity. So what needs to happen to get visibility and handle these new complexities? Teams must adopt observability. So Dave just gave a quick definition of observability, but really the question we get asked a lot is, how is it different from monitoring? So monitoring is really about keeping an eye on things we know could fail. Observable systems, on the other hand, really empower teams to troubleshoot any issue that may occur in their systems, including unknown failures and failures with root causes buried deep in these new microservices mazes. So really things that you didn't instrument for, and to know that maybe something is going to fail there. So basically, observability allows us to ask questions about our systems that we did not think to ask before something goes wrong, or you're getting tweets that something's down or your customers are affected, which is really scary. So observability does not replace monitoring. It goes beyond monitoring to detect these unexpected failure conditions and explain why they happened. And it's really the proxy for our customers' happiness. So teams, again, they can't do observability without monitoring. Monitoring enables observability, but observability vastly expands the set of data to all of it, or the metrics, the traces, and logs. And really what action needs to be taken on this data to enable those insights, automate processes. And, again, this is something I'm going to talk a little bit more about as we go on in this presentation. But maybe you're still wondering how this new complexity brought on from cloud can lead to some of these unknown unknowns. It feels very abstract, right? Well, as we move to cloud native, yes, we adopt microservices and cloud and new frameworks and all the other things that I talked about and more. And we need to make decisions on how to monitor, analyze, and respond to cloud native behavior and make sense of these failure conditions. So in this example, right, monoliths we consider to be more simple, where the relationships between a failure and its root cause is clear to identify, act, and respond to. So in this case, we have the known knowns. Microservices are more complicated and consist of these known unknowns. So that means that the relationship between service degradation and root cause requires more analysis and more information. Because there are a wide range of problem-causing culprits, we need to go through the full suspect lineup and follow our hypotheses before identifying the perpetrators. So microservices and cloud and orchestration technology all together creates these complex systems where failures don't always repeat, and anything that could go wrong eventually will. So, one day, surprise, like something new is breaking and your day just went from good to really bad. And maybe if you're an SRE, you're on call, you're dealing with alerts, you're putting out fires, and you're not focusing on building these new customer-facing apps. So while troubleshooting issues, you may actually have to act before you understand the underlying root cause. And these complex systems introduce these unknown unknowns where you can only understand the root cause in retrospect if you have all the data to do it. And you don't know what you don't know. So the unpredictable nature of our applications means we have to watch everything all the time, or at least your observability solution should, so you can troubleshoot these issues quickly, no matter how unexpected the failure condition is. So observability helps make sense of our complex systems. I know you get it. I've been talking about it. It gives us visibility into the state of the system all the time, hopefully with all the data. And I will go into what all of it means in a second. Observability lets us know when things go wrong and where they are going wrong. Very important. And because of this, we can get answers when something goes wrong and be proactive when preparing for future problems. So we spent time talking about what observability is, but let's dive into our immutable rule number 1. That's that you need to use all of your data to avoid blind spots and solve any issue that comes up in your environment. So taking one more step back, observability starts with data. And I talked about the 3 types of telemetry data that underpins observability: metrics, traces, and logs. Metrics tell us if there is a problem. Traces lead us to where the problem is. And logs, which are our favorite friends from the past, really help us find the root cause. So while we treat all 3 of these data types as separate, maybe they actually all overlap and they're important in context. Logs can yield metrics, traces can yield metrics, metrics can point you to the right trace or the right log. So each of these pieces gives us additional information along our troubleshooting workflow and assist in our recognition of issues to help us find these root causes. And I talked to a customer yesterday that said most companies, like they were doing 1 or 2 of these things really good. So his advice is to identify the gaps to make sure you have a complete picture and start there, not being overwhelmed, which I thought was good advice. I just wanted to throw out there. And because today's software is incredibly complicated and it generates tons of data, metrics, logs, and traces are generated constantly by hundreds of services for even simple applications. Every transaction can generate on the order of kilobytes of metadata about the transaction, and multiplying that to account for even a small amount of concurrency can create a few megabytes a second of data. And that customer I was just talking about, they had over 15 million web requests and 8 million distinct traces for just one customer-facing application. So without full fidelity data capture or all the data, their app could have these customer impacting issues, but data may be missing from these 8 million unique traces, making it harder to pinpoint and therefore fix the issue before business is impacted. So in order to do observability right, you need all of this data at full fidelity to inform your decision making. And beyond just collecting all your data, these are the things you need your data to do. So you need it to inform AI-driven directed troubleshooting for faster mean time to resolution. You need your data to give the ability to slice and dice at high cardinality for faster analysis, faster drill down. You need the data to populate in real time so we can quickly understand when failures occur and capture that ephemeral data. And you need your data to remain at full fidelity so there's no missing information. And also showing up in intuitive dashboards and charts doesn't hurt either. And the last important thing I want to note that your data should do is that capturing the data needs to be standardized and open to avoid lock-in and provide that flexibility. But what are the scary consequences if you missed your ephemeral data from maybe your Kubernetes cluster or some serverless functions, or your data showed you something that you couldn't drill into, or you only saw the good things about your data or the bad things, right? This is where real business consequences come up. So the thought of all this data can seem overwhelming. And what we hear from people is that too much data is noise and that too much data is going to be too much to deal with. And here are some ways that traditional observability tools have dealt with that noise. So linear low paths really smooths the data, destroys those sharp edges. Bandpass might optimize that signal to noise ratio, but loses the outliers. And smart aggregation does make the data easier to visualize, but can sacrifice data integrity. So we argue it's not a case of too much data. It's not noise. It's really the case of your aggregation and visualization. They have to be better. So you need all the data, but you need to be able to easily understand it and see it. And it's really the tool that becomes overloaded and not that you have too much data. And I think we can all agree, like, you're only going to have more data as time goes on. So why can't we use those previous methods to deal with the noise? And what are the consequences that I talked about? So sampling is throwing away data. Throwing data away is never a good thing. You will almost always certainly need the one thing you throw away or you don't see. I mean, even just sampling a group of people for a survey or throwing away some responses can lead to wildly inaccurate insights. So, with sampling, you now get an alert storm because you threw data that bridge the transactional path away. So your alerts become unconnected and you don't need all of these alerts, right? So in loose terms, you may get alert on A, which is caused by a problem on C, but you threw B away. If you had B, you could use the transactional path and use all your data to keep your alerts in context and really go through that investigatory workflow. So you don't get berated with an alert storm, which is terrible. And the same thing really applies to triage. If you don't have data connection, you can't make the logical assumptions while you're troubleshooting. And one final thing is we don't sample our infrastructure data. So now you have all the infrastructure data and not the correlated application data. So now infrastructure and app insights don't match. And if they're not the same data set, they're not as useful as they could be, again, since they're super important in context. So it may be impossible to correlate application degradation to an underlying infrastructure problem, which is really a common problem that we see a lot. So lots of words, but here's some pictures and an example of sampling. So these are both the same data set. So in number 1, the data is sampled, and in image number 2, it is not. So what we see here is that sampling actually gives me a selection bias, and it doesn't see the things that are out of range. So it thinks my duration is 2 seconds, when in reality, my duration is 29 to 40 seconds. In other words, it's causing blind spots. And in our world, 29 seconds is known as a lost sale. Right? I've abandoned many weird Amazon purchases for even less latency than that. So yes, you need to know what the norm is before you even know what your issues are. And if you're leveraging solutions that have AI capabilities, you want to make sure those recommendations know what the norm is as well, and not just all of the bad stuff. So you can't investigate if you don't have all the data, and you can't investigate all of the underlying structures that support your applications and business. So if you don't have all the data after your triage, then you can't answer the questions you may have to ask to understand what went wrong. So rule number 1, use all your data to avoid blind spots. You need all your data to do observability. It really depends on it. Sample data introduces bias, which has business consequences like not knowing when there is an issue or where the issue is. And you need all the data to understand baselines, not just the bad stuff, to ask about the unknowns and track customer happiness. So basically, in a nutshell, you can't fix what you can't see. And finally, real time matters, as we'll find out with rule number 2. So over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Nicolette. That was a great review of how the data and its access can impact our decision-making here. But I'm going to take this a little bit different. Our rule tool: operate at the speed and resolution of your application and your infrastructure. And the first point on this really is that impacts the insights you get. So how we look at the data and how we receive the data actually can change not just selection bias, but actually color and skew the results that we're seeing showing up here. And it really comes into play in this thing that you can call an observability bottleneck. Flashing back, we talk a lot about this thing called the von Neumann bottleneck, which is a computer hardware topic that says we can only be as fast as the slowest access channel in our computers. CPUs are blindingly fast these days, but our memory access is not as fast. And so therefore we have this problem that lets us slow down. We have to go with the slowest component. Likewise, the same thing can happen in working with our observability data here. We can get our resolution of our data, our precision and accuracy may be coming in at blinding speeds. For instance, something like OpenTelemetry could bring in data at nanosecond resolution. The speed of the data, which is the deterministic response for this, the way that we can deal with the data, may be a lot slower, similar to our memory problem and our CPU problem here. And because of that, it influences our aggregation, our analysis, and our visualization, as well as actually looking at our response structures, whether they are auto remediation or whether they are sending an alert to the appropriate person to handle an issue that comes up for this. But it really starts with this concept of accuracy and precision here. And quite often, you hear these two terms used interchangeably, but they're really not interchangeable here. Accuracy is the concept that the measure is correct. And precision means it's consistent with other measurements. Think of this as shooting arrows at a target. You've shot 5 arrows, one of them hit the bullseye, but the rest of them are outside of the outer ring. You were accurate, but not precise for this. Likewise, you shoot the same 5 arrows, and those are all grouped within a 2-inch circle. They just happen to be in the outside ring here. You're very precise, but you're not accurate. Observability depends on both accuracy and precision. We need to know that the results we're getting are consistent both over time and represent the actual state of what we're looking at here. But aggregation and analysis can skew that. And so as an example, let's take a look at this. These are 10 requests per second things that are coming in play here. Our 10-second average is 13.9 requests per second. Our 95th percentile is 27, roughly. If we take the first 5 and aggregate the first 5, our 95th percentile is now 29. And if we take the second 5, our 95th percentile is 19.4. All of these aggregations missed the fact that one of them crossed our threshold of 30. And so we now have this ability to not only have to look at the aggregated, we also need to be able to examine each point precisely. And so that we know what the data is telling us in each of those cases. So keep in mind that aggregation, what you may be looking at the screen and the visualization behind it, may not be representing the real-time streaming flow of the data that's coming in. And on top of that, we have this data resolution and reporting resolution issues. Both of these can be problematic. How fast your data comes in, as well as how often you update that. Nicolette referred to serverless functionality for this. Right now, I think the average AWS Lambda warm start is about 30 microseconds. And that, at least in our space, looking at our own tools, our own product, our Lambda execution is about 1.2 seconds. So think about this. If my data resolution is coming in at a 10-second basis or a 1-minute basis, I've missed a whole bunch of Lambda starts and stops inside of this. Now, that same aggregation may be rolling up and looking at these in groups of 10 seconds on my dashboarding, which can still be meaningful. I'm still going to get the overall data, but I can't look back and see what's going on in the aggregation. That's why I need the full fidelity ability to dive in here. The finer granularity, the more potential precision. Keep in mind that precision is not a thing that just comes into play here. In observability, we talk about these things as native resolution is our collection point intervals, how often we collect the data and bring it in here. Chart resolution is what the aggregation points that our graphs use looks like here. We want speedy data collection and sufficient chart resolution. If you have an environment that doesn't change for 5 minutes at a time, your chart resolution at 5 minutes is fine. If you have something that is changing constantly, your chart resolution may need to go down to 1 second so that we can actually see what's going on. On top of all this, we have this terrible thing around complexity. And in particular, I want to talk about some things that, again, were mentioned: ephemeral behavior, elastic behavior, and drift and skew. So in our complexity, and this is simply showing a complexity for literally a Kubernetes map here, we can have a lot of different complexity items that are coming into play here. Expand that across the fact that when you go to look for something, it might not be there. It's ephemeral. Again, 1.2 seconds, that serverless function is now gone. Or the node has been started and stopped, or the pod has spun up or spun down inside of this. We have a lot of ephemeral and elastic behaviors, and we need to be able to track that so that we know what was happening in correlation between the application and the infrastructure. They don't work separately. We need to know what's going on. Likewise, we can have drift and skew. So drift means that we're getting in data from multiple different systems, be they virtual or be they physical. And those systems may be reporting and what they think is their correct time, but those times may not match up. Therefore, you need the ability to take your data and de-skew or de-drift it, keep track of what's coming in, when it's coming in, and being able to align it as part of your functionality. Now, all of this is really around kind of this predictive behavior one. What we really want to know is what's coming next. We are using observability and the data to look back and see what happened, but we also really kind of want to know what's coming next. Do I need to add more disk storage? Do I need to add more memory? Those pieces are not as necessarily as easy to figure out. Think of it this way. Prediction, extrapolation is really not a great guarantee. There are certain things that are really easy to do. So for instance, if your data is very precise and very accurate, then you can have what's called a stationary or linear trend inside of this. If it's stationary, it's always flat. Your extrapolation is probably pretty good. The distribution is known. You can set a static threshold, for instance, on here. If the distribution isn't known, then maybe you can set a sudden change because we now know what we can expect inside of that. If it's a linear trend, we can look at things like the resources are running out. And so we can actually look for the trend to close the gap. And now we're looking at the negative space of our data, saying, oh, okay, I've only got 1% left on a disk, or I'm out of memory. I'm using 100% of my memory inside of here. Or it could be seasonal. And seasonal could be what happened last Friday? What happened in aggregate across the previous 4 Fridays inside of that? If none of those apply, you're on your own. It's not quite that bad, very honestly, but the rules change based on your needs. And therefore, it's an understanding of your data, your environment, and your type that will drive your further transformations and modeling so that you can start looking at predictive behavior. Artificial intelligence can help a lot. Machine learning can help a lot here. But keep in mind that you've got to account for time shift and transformations for this. When you're looking at this, make the decision between, is it a historical anomaly? Is it a value from a better baseline? All those different pieces do apply. When we get to historical, let me add a couple of things here. Historical does not mean point specific. It's not necessarily what happened last Friday at 10:35 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It can be multiple Fridays. What's happened in general across those Fridays? And would also point out that it makes more sense to use median versus mean. Sort of here's why. Say that, for instance, I've got 4 Fridays that I'm looking at here. And a couple of weeks ago, I had an anomaly that hit and it dropped a point. And then it went back to normal. Now I've dropped another point. I'm right now, and I'm way down from what I was. The mean would have been infected by the 2 weeks before. My mean would have shifted. My median, not so much. So that the total number of messages, for instance, in this case, in a social media environment, that lower dropper metrics means we've got lower users using here. In the alert details, we can see the normal ranges of value and that how they would have not been impacted the same way as median versus mean across our thresholds. And so making use of the median for historical anomalies is actually a really useful point. So summing up, observability is really only as useful as your data's precision and accuracy. And you need to make sure your data understands elastic, ephemeral, and skew. Keep all the data. You are someday going to need that data to come in here. And while we can look at prediction as being the target, you need to keep in mind extrapolation and interpolation and your unique circumstances. Are you willing to deal with the number of false positives or false negatives that come out from an extrapolation viewpoint? So let me close with one of my favorite quotes about this. The most effective debugging rule is still careful thought, coupled by judiciously placed print statements. Brian Kernighan put this in Unix for Beginners, 1979, and it still is true today. The data is going to show us things, but we are responsible for thinking about what that underlying meaning for that data is here. Observability, with its access to more information and more capability for insights, is our new print statement. in this environment. And if you're curious about the other 12 rules, feel free to go out and try it. There's a scan on here, or go out and look at Splunk, and you can fill out and grab these 12 points for yourself. We'd love to hear from you. If you have ideas or concepts, that would be great for this. And with that, let me say thank you on behalf of both Nicolette and myself for joining us today and learning our view on these 12 immutable rules for observability. Thanks.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm here with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at ways to build and lead product teams in uncertain times. Wonder when that is. The world seems to be changing faster than ever, and there's no reason to believe it will be slowing down anytime soon. The pandemic has compounded this sense of constant flux, with customer priorities shifting overnight. Against this backdrop, product teams need to constantly evolve their development work without losing focus or feeling they need to react to every small change in the market. This requires team leads to throw out their old playbooks and develop a new strategy that allows them to deliver continuous innovation without creating chaos for their teams or losing sight of their North Star. Roadmaps are shrinking from years to months and are now being created with the understanding that they may become outdated or redundant at any time. Building and maintaining an organization that can not only survive but thrive in these conditions is a daunting task. It requires a structured, programmatic approach that also supports agility and adaptability. Those requirements may feel at odds, but they actually are not. This article offers up 5 tactics to help an organization's product strategy evolve with the times. And we look at prioritizing scalability, reliability, and security in engineering. As digital products and services are more deeply embedded in critical industries and infrastructure, and the implications of problems grow in scope, engineering organizations are renewing their focus on building platforms that are scalable, reliable, and secure. More importantly, they are recognizing that this is not the responsibility of an SRE or CSO. It's an ethos that must be carried each day by every engineer on the team. This is an important shift from teams and cultures that valued speed of delivery above all else to teams and cultures that make high-quality systems the foundation of everything they do. This isn't easy, and big cultural changes don't happen overnight. There are many things that can go wrong when the team is operating in the legacy mode of prioritizing quick time to market. This article offers up some strategies and best practices for beginning the process of cultural change across an engineering organization. All right, in news, Akamai Technologies launched a service that consolidates the process of securing web applications and APIs. App and API Protector makes it easier for IT teams to embrace DevSecOps best practices via a converged web application and API service rather than using separate tools and services to secure them individually. The service is also designed to continuously discover API requests that are then automatically inspected for malicious code. Optional API security controls can be enforced based on policies defined by internal IT teams. Akamai has been making a case for outsourcing the management of web application and API security via the content delivery network it created, which provides a layer of isolation between web-facing applications and the rest of the enterprise. The challenge organizations now routinely face is as they move to deploy cloud-native applications based on microservices, the responsibility for security has become more decentralized. The security services provided by Akamai create an opportunity to better manage application security via a single pane of glass at a time when there is more focus than ever on securing software supply chains. All All right, over on Container Journal, the Technical Oversight Committee for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation has voted to advance the Longhorn Distributed Block Storage System for Kubernetes to the next level. Longhorn was originally developed by Rancher Labs, which was acquired by SUSE, and donated to the CNCF as a sandbox project. Now an incubation level project, Longhorn's next step would be to graduate alongside Kubernetes. Longhorn uses a control plane that is based on the controller design pattern and leverages dynamic pod management to provision its data plane communication stack. The various components that make up the platform communicate via the gRPC protocol. It also provides support for incremental snapshots that can be used for backup to external platforms, non-disruptive upgrades that enable updates to the platform without taking nodes offline, an integrated dashboard, and the ability to share metrics with the open-source Prometheus monitoring platform, which is also under the direction of the CNCF. And Red Hat has made generally available an update to Red Hat Enterprise Linux that adds full support for the Podman tool. Podman is used for managing containers and pods on Kubernetes clusters within CI/CD systems and other operating environments. Designed for containers that comply with the Open Container Initiative specification, Podman makes it possible for IT teams to manage the entire container ecosystem from a command line interface, which typically is favored by DevOps teams. Version 8.5 of RHEL also adds default container image signature verification, which, in addition to verifying the integrity of container images at installation, confirms that images are pulled from the Red Hat Container Registry and have not been tampered with since they were originally signed. The line between which container management functions will be handled by platforms such as Kubernetes and operating systems is starting to blur. In many cases, IT teams are building applications using containers without using any orchestration platform, so integration with Podman provides an alternative approach for IT teams to manage the container environment. And as the number of containers deployed in IT environments continues to increase, there will be more reliance on automation at all levels of the IT stack to make up for the ongoing shortage of IT skills. Okay, over on Security Boulevard, we look at the results of a survey that shows mid-sized companies in particular are really struggling with security. Although more than half of IT decision makers at mid-sized companies think cybersecurity is a moderate to high priority for their group, the majority believe the larger organization has not prioritized IT security issues. The study also revealed 60% of mid-size organizations suffered a ransomware attack in the past 18 months, and 20% spent $250,000 or more to fully recover from it. In addition, 65% of organizations reported they had not conducted a cybersecurity risk assessment. There are a number of other statistics in this report covered in the article, and most point to the fact that mid-market cybersecurity challenges need to be aligned with core business objectives, and that requires understanding an organization's current security state. Otherwise, there will be misalignment of security program investment in areas that are not high risk to the business, while neglecting the real risks. And finally, we have an article about the growing trend of cyber insurers taking a more active role in enforcing cybersecurity within their clients' organizations. Cyber insurance is designed to protect organizations against the financial fallout of cyber attacks. It can play a role both in what a company does when it experiences an attack and in preventing attacks from occurring in the first place. The threat of increased cyber insurance premiums and stricter security controls also play a strong role in motivating companies to shore up their security systems. Cyber insurance for businesses is becoming as necessary as health insurance for individuals. Some businesses, especially small ones, are reluctant to commit to the expense of the insurance itself in addition to the expense of improving their security protocols. However, the rampant increase in cyber attacks has illustrated that it is no longer a matter of if a company will be attacked, but when. And that means companies ultimately can't afford not to have cybersecurity insurance. That said, insurers are implementing stricter qualification requirements because the cybersecurity dynamic has changed. This is similar to a health insurance provider changing its list of requirements, such as the lists of pre-existing conditions, how stringent it is in what it covers because the health dynamic of its insured population has changed. This article does a deep dive into cyber insurance and what organizations need to keep in mind for both selecting and renewing their cyber insurance policies. All right, that's it for the headlines. Please check back with me tomorrow when I'll have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope you have a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Stephen DeVries. I think it's DeVries. Is it DeVries?
It's a DeVries.
I had it. All right. So Stephen is the founder and CEO of a company called Urius Risk. See, I should have checked this beforehand. All right. Yay. All right. No, 2 for 2. Oh, this is going to be a really good day, folks. No, but thank you, Stephen, for getting on Techstrong TV with me. I do appreciate you being here. Tell me a little bit about Urius Risk.
Well, hi, Charlene, and thanks for the opportunity of being here. Really excited for this conversation. So Urius Risk is really founded around the idea of helping more developer folks than security folks understand what do they need to do from a security perspective before they start building software or deploying something to the cloud. So the concept is really to give them a heads up of what are the security requirements of this complex thing that they're building, so that they know, what is the work that's ahead of them and what are they expected to do from a security perspective.
Well, that's so important, and it's very relevant to our audience, especially the developer community that is getting deeper and deeper into DevSecOps. We've been banging the drum about DevSecOps for a couple of years now, but I think in the last 18 months or so, it's really become apparent the importance of taking a security first posture with all phases of application development and deployment, and even within the security posture of the company itself. So you guys are in that sweet spot for us. So I love that. So you guys recently actually kind of open source, or you made your model, your threat modeling technology free to the developer community?
That's right. So we have a community edition, which anybody can access. It's available from our website on iriusrisk.com, or if you want to go directly, it's community.iriusrisk.com. And what it'll allow you to do is to build one threat model. So it's limited in that you can only build one model, but that model can be extremely complex. So you can build a complex multi-component model, including cloud components as well as application components. And what Urius Risk will do is essentially produce a list of threats against that model for each of the components and a list of countermeasures. So recommended countermeasures that you can put into place, if you wanted to mitigate those threats for your model. I think the interesting thing and the useful thing for the developer community is that you do this from a design. So before you start building anything, before you start writing any code, before you start, essentially turning this into a reality, you have a design, you have a plan of what you want to build with what kinds of components or what kinds of technologies. With Urius Risk, you can use our draw.io interface, so a familiar diagramming interface where you go and diagram out, this is what my architecture is going to look like. These are the components. You can answer questions, predefined questions on those components. And as you tell the system what your architecture is going to look like, it can then go and generate those threats and generate those countermeasures for you automatically.
Oh, that's That sounds really great. It sounds like a pretty, well, I don't want to say it's pretty simple technology, but it seems like it would be pretty user-friendly for the developer community to use.
It is user-friendly. And funny you should say, mention simple, because if we built this technology, if we built Arius Risk in 2003, when I started my career in application security, there would probably only be like 5 things you need to worry about, right?
Right,
the only
right.
thing we're deploying are CGI bins on Perl, so don't do these 5 things and you're fine.
Right.
But nowadays, you're deploying on Kubernetes to AWS to Azure. You're building web apps. You're building APIs. There are mobile clients. There's such a huge amount of different types of technologies you can use.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge for the developers is they understand the technology, but what are the security implications of each of those pieces of technology? And that's the part of the puzzle that we can help them answer.
Yeah, and I would imagine not just the security implications of them, but what are also the relationships between things, and how does that impact security? And to your point, it is such a complex undertaking these days that the tools that many organizations traditionally have relied on, maybe even as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, it's probably completely outdated now and really not as useful as what is necessary to ensure that developers are being the most security conscious and compliant, and making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted well before things go into production. So what have you been hearing, or what has your organization been hearing from the developer community about this technology? I mean, is it a technology whose time has come? Is it maybe even something that they should have had a couple of years ago that now they're just kind of cutting to? And I'd be interested in finding out what the market is saying about something like this.
Yeah, so we launched our first very early version of Arius Risk in 2015, and we've had adoption since then, but it really hasn't accelerated until about the last 2 years. We've seen a different change in the market where folks are really looking for something to help them automate this threat modeling process. And to be clear, threat modeling as an activity, it was probably born around 1999 or
right.
Around about that time. Microsoft did a lot of work around that, but it was all very much focused on manual work, thinking about threats, understanding architecture, thinking about what can go wrong and what are you going to do about it, and so on. And it's only very recently, when companies really started trying to scale this out, they realized, well, we can't keep doing this manual process across 4,000 developers and 10,000 applications, right? It just doesn't scale. And that's where the need for automation has come in. Thinking about the market and how it has matured, 2 things have happened fairly recently, which give me a good indication that now is the time for threat modeling. One of them was that, as a spin-off of the executive order on cybersecurity from the Biden administration, the NIST had to come up with a recommended set of minimum guidance for security in software, and as part of that recommended list, step 1 is do threat modeling, right? So it was the first time that I think that NIST has come out so clearly, well, I wouldn't say in favor, but propounding threat modeling as a core part of how to build software securely. And the other event was the OWASP Top 10, which is the top 10 risks facing application security. And the 2021 updated list has insecure design as the number 4 risk facing organizations today, which I thought was fascinating. That now OWASP, which is a lot of companies and organizations contributes to that list to come up with that top 10, and they've identified insecure design as the 4th most important thing to be worried about. And I think it speaks a bit more to the point you made earlier about the interconnectedness of of today's systems. Many years ago, you'd build one big monolithic application and you'd scan with a code scanner, you'd maybe do some code inspection, and that was kind of it. But now you've got many different components spread all over the place, some are in this cloud, some are in a different cloud, some are in a third party, and it is those interconnections between them that really start to matter. And how much do you trust this third party where you are sending your data? So yeah, I think this is the time for threat modeling.
Yeah, well, to your point, we're talking about code now that is. I think I read some sort of statistic that said that maybe 80% of code that's being used today is reused code. It's not brand new. So, if we're talking about stringing together all this open code, threat modeling, it almost seems like it's a necessity to make sure that the code that's being used is hygienically, appropriate for the application that's being developed, and to understand those dependencies and to understand how those different snippets of code actually end up working together. I mean, obviously they'll go through the testing process and such, but we don't know, if it does end up introducing vulnerabilities, or if that, could end up impacting another part of the infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. So good stuff all the way around. I think threat modeling is maybe something that organizations in the past didn't really give as much thought to because of maybe the complexity therein, or they just didn't think that what they were doing was enough to merit doing threat modeling. But I think things have come full circle now, and organizations do recognize the importance of it and how it really should be an integral part of their DevSecOps strategy. So, I'm hoping that we'll see even greater uptake in threat modeling and how organizations can help lock down their applications moving forward. I mean, if OWASP is calling out application development, then I know we got a big problem here. So hopefully this will help.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think it's a great step forward for DevSecOps. We need to get developers more involved in security, and thinking about security at the design phase is a great place to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. This has been really, really fascinating. Now, if folks want to check out your threat modeling technology and the community edition, just go to the website then.
Yeah, website is best. It's ariusrisk.com or community.ariusrisk.com.
Excellent. Are you working with any of the CNCF or any of the foundations to kind of open source this as well, or is that kind of a down the line possibility?
It's a down the line possibility, definitely. We're currently working with the CIS, the Center for Internet Security. They publish benchmarks on security, and we've built our Kubernetes benchmark, or our Kubernetes threat library is based off of their benchmark.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Stephen, thanks again for having the conversation with me. I wish you guys the best of luck, and I think we're going to be hearing and talking a lot more about threat modeling in the future. So I appreciate your time today.
Super. Thank you, Charlene.
Good. Thank you. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jaron Bradley, who is a Mac OS detections lead expert at Jamf. That is a mouthful. And Patrick Wardle, who is an Apple security expert and founder of Objective-C. Jaron and Patrick, thank you both for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. It's great to see you both.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So I want to talk to you about malware, because really nobody's talking about malware these days, right? But it is a huge topic, especially among the cybersecurity crowds, and to a much larger extent these days to regular folk. And as people actually understand what malware is and how it can impact an organization, I'm interested in finding out from you guys what you guys are seeing on the landscape. Did you guys put out some research lately or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we publish, kind of trends and overviews of what we're seeing. Jaron and I both focus in the Apple arena, specifically Mac OS, but there's some really interesting trends that have kind of come to the forefront in the last year or so. And really one of the main things we're seeing is Macs are becoming ever more popular, ever more prevalent, especially in the enterprise. People are now working from home. People love their Mac computers. They're becoming ever more popular. And unfortunately, kind of in lockstep with the increased popularity of Mac OS, we're seeing Mac malware also emerge on the scene and, equally gain in popularity. And this is really unsurprising. Hackers are very opportunistic. And as there are more Macs out there, as I mentioned, especially in the enterprise, there's going to be more targets. And so one of the main trends we're seeing is not just this uptick of Mac malware and Mac adware, but also that adversaries are taking their malware that was originally written for another platform, for example, Windows, and then port that over so it can natively run on Mac OS. And again, this to me really just shows that the hackers, the malware authors are aware of trends of what's popular and are making sure that their malicious creations are compatible with whatever users are using. In this case, a lot more Mac systems these days.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think also to build on top of what Patrick's saying a little bit, we've even seen some of your more basic malware, things like pups or adware over the years. Some of the research that we posted and some of the research Patrick and I dug into was a piece of adware that had actually modified itself to be incredibly more sophisticated by abusing zero-day vulnerabilities within it that allowed it to bypass a lot of Apple's security checks. So even some of this more less threatening, you might consider adware that a lot of users might kind of ignore and think, that's just kind of bland adware. Even that's getting more and more sophisticated.
It's interesting that we're still having a conversation about adware. I feel like 10 years ago, this would have been a relevant conversation, and we're still having it today. And I have to wonder, is it because that type of malware it still works among, your average user, maybe people who are not so tech savvy, don't really have their finger on the cybersecurity pulse, as it were. Because I feel like the cybersecurity sector in general has progressed so far past adware, but here we are having this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting that it continues to stick around. As long as there's financially motivated attackers, you'll continue to see adware. When in reality, a lot of times what ends up on your computer is just software you don't want there that's taking up space on your browser or whatever it be. Ultimately, like adware has no reason to be written well, right? Its goal is just to get ads in front of you. That often leads to bogging down your system and slowing things down and stuff like that. But like I said, as long as we have financially motivated attackers, we'll continue to see that. And on the Mac OS platform specifically, we see a lot of adware. When it comes to users installing things they shouldn't, adware is definitely very abundant on Mac OS. And kind of one of our philosophies is if these adware authors are able to get on so many different systems, if they're able to get installed on so many different users' systems. Some of the more advanced attackers, like you can imagine, what their capabilities are as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think Jaron really hit the nail on the head. It's really about financial gain. There's just so much money to be made. Adware authors are spending a ton of time and resources making sure that their malicious creations can run effectively on Mac OS. So we're actually seeing some impressive innovations, and I say that as a malware author, malware analyst, in the sense that, we're really seeing innovations in the adware space where, for example, Jaron mentioned they sometimes introduce zero-day vulnerabilities specifically to work around Apple's security mechanisms. And the reason is just there's so much money to be made and so much money to be lost when Apple, for example, introduces a new security mechanism that may thwart their infection vectors. So, when there's so much money on the table, it's really unsurprising that they continue to push, and they're very, very capable, very sophisticated of how they're able to get onto end user systems. And as Jaron mentioned, sometimes even leverage zero-day vulnerabilities, which are security issues that there are no patch for yet. So it's kind of an interesting trend to see the sophistication of adware continue to increase.
So, I'm a very, very long time Mac user. Love it. I've drank the apple Kool-Aid, and I've got
the apple juice.
The apple juice. There we go. The apple juice. I like that. But, one of the reasons why I loved it when I first adopted it was because it seemed so much more secure than Windows. And we were hearing about Windows vulnerabilities left and right, but Apple seemed to be bulletproof. But clearly that has changed. So why? I mean, what has happened besides the increasing prevalence of Mac OS machines in the workplace? Why is it that we are now hearing so much more about Mac vulnerabilities and the abundance of malware infecting Mac machines?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I really like to talk about because I think it's really important for users to understand the risks that face them and also the security or rather insecurity of their devices, so they understand the reality and what proactive steps they can take to protect themselves. So various components, various pieces, but the short answer is that Apple really did a great job on the marketing side, essentially convincing us all that Macs didn't get malware. Recently, as 5 or 6 years ago, if you went to apple.com, there was, verbiage on the website saying Macs don't get Windows viruses. And that's a very nuanced statement. You could argue, yes, Windows viruses don't run on Mac, but the takeaway that people consumed from that was Macs don't get viruses, which really was the intention of Apple's marketing department. And kudos to them. I mean, they did an incredible job. Apple is an incredibly valuable company, and the average Mac user still thinks their Mac system is secure. But the reality is it never was. But as you mentioned, because of the fact that Macs weren't that common, the average Mac user didn't encounter maybe adware or malware because all the hackers and malware writers were focusing on Windows platform. I mean, Windows had 90% of the marketplace. Why would hackers spend any other time elsewhere? So now we're coming back to the fact that Macs are becoming ever more prevalent and hackers are starting to switch or really kind of change their focus. And the reality is Mac OS is just as vulnerable as any other operating system. It's not magically more secure, regardless of what Apple says. So it's really important for users to realize that, because if they believe Apple's marketing propaganda, they are actually going to be more at risk because they will not take those precautions, for example, when they're browsing the internet or downloading email attachments for untrusted sources. So it's really important for them to understand, hey, there are risks out there that are able to infect Mac systems, even fully patched ones. So, regardless of what Apple says, maybe run third-party security tools, maybe be extra careful, and really take some personal responsibility to make sure that your system doesn't become hacked. And so I think that's a really important message that users need to hear, because what's coming out of Cupertino is sometimes a lot of just marketing hype.
Yeah. And then once again, to build on top of what Patrick's saying, one of my favorite examples of this is there's a book called The Cuckoo's Egg written by Clifford Stoll. This is about an attack that happened. Honestly, I think it was 70s or 80s. I can't even remember, but it was an attack, a targeted attack on like the Berkeley network, where secrets were being stolen off there, like different trademark work, stuff like that. And this was all off of Linux systems, which, today you think Linux and you're like, oh, nobody's using Linux. It must be like super secure, right? But back then, like Linux was everywhere. It's what people, it's it's where all these servers were that were holding these different files that users could share and build on. So this whole this early targeted attack was focused on Linux because at the time, once again, it was where the market share was at. It's where the good data was at. For so long, the market leader has been Windows, right? It's been so high up that that's what people have been going after. But these early attacks from the Cuckoo's Egg that were documented are just kind of evidence that the attackers are going to go after wherever the market share is. And as Mac continues to grow in popularity, we're going to continue to see more and more malware for that.
Yeah, it's sad. I guess I have to say that, it's, one of the things that I thought I could always count on was the fact that my Mac is secure, but I guess not so much. So, so two things regarding that. First of all, you mentioned Linux, which is obviously open source. And we've been hearing a lot about the software supply chain issues coming, over the last 12 to 18 months or so. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of open source software that's being used these days, or open source code. Do you guys see anything? I mean, obviously SolarWinds was a big example of cyber threat actors taking advantage of a vulnerability in code. But do you guys see that as just kind of a general trend, as the use of open source software being an attack vector for or for cyber threat actors moving forward? I mean, are they going to pinpoint target those vulnerabilities and exploit them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I really think if we put on our black hats and think as adversaries for a second, it's really the best way to infect a large number of targets. If you can, infect a package manager or a website that's distributing software, you can perhaps hit thousands and tens of thousands of systems without having to individually target those. And that's exactly what the SolarWinds adversaries did. And that was kind of why they took that approach. On macOS, we have seen instances where popular third-party application websites have been compromised, and then the adversaries, the hackers, were able to manipulate some of the packages that were available there. I think it's really important to note that this isn't specific to open source software. I mean, yes, some of the attacks do fall that. But for example, I believe SolarWinds was just a third-party security product that their servers had been compromised, and the software that was being distributed was actually pre-compiled, which in retrospect made it more difficult to detect. One good thing that's worth pointing out, at least on the Apple platform and the Apple ecosystem, is something called notarization. And what Apple has done is said, in order for software to run on recent versions of macOS, it has to have Apple's specific stamp of approval. So the idea is software developers have to submit their applications to Apple, and Apple will scan it for malicious code and essentially then only approve it once it's gone through this process. So in theory, this should at least stymie supply chain attacks against macOS, because even if adversaries are able to infect an open source software package or a third-party website that's distributing compiled applications that users might go to and inadvertently download, these will not be notarized, so macOS won't run them. Of course, notarization is not perfect. We've seen vulnerabilities and ways to skirt this, but it's a really good step in the right direction, and will essentially force adversaries, again, in the macOS space, to submit their subverted payloads to Apple to get the stamp of approval before they can pull off this supply chain attack. So it kind of forces Apple into the middle of it, and so they can scan and verify software. So again, not foolproof, not a panacea, not a silver bullet, but a good step in the right direction. On other platforms, I'm not sure the security mechanisms that are in place, but as I mentioned, it's such an incredibly powerful attack vector. We're likely to see adversaries, continuing that. I'm sure every ransomware group, hacker group took copious notes about the SolarWinds attack and said, wow, this is a really powerful infection vector that allows us to hit tons of targets. So, why wouldn't they continue to try to pull off such attacks?
Yeah. And two like very specific examples that come to mind quickly are just even is relatively recently, Patrick and I both looked at a malware sample that ultimately got labeled Zuru malware, right? ZURU. And this was
that, Jaron.
That actually Patrick came up with that name as well. So
awesome.
There you go. You're talking to the guy. But basically, it took an open source project, iTerm, not mistaken. And this is for a lot of usually power users, iTerm, people running commands on computers and to get results. Basically took that, added some malicious code to it, and then hosted it on the internet and managed to get where if you went to some Chinese search engines and punched in iTerm download, you would get this result before you would get the legitimate one. Wow. And then people could download this, install it. It would operate just like the normal iTerm, but instead it would also do stuff in the background that the user would be none the wiser about. A second example would be the XCS set malware that was discovered in 2021. It might have been August 2020 on its initial discovery, now that I think about it, but it's updated over the years and stayed very recent. Its goal is to infect actual developers' systems when they're building applications. And when they build those applications to aim and try and release them to other users, it aims to kind of infect the user's apps. So they're unknowingly distributing applications that might have been infected in some manner. And it's and these are the more sophisticated attacks we're going to continue to see more and more of, I think.
Yeah, I don't really like to hear that. I got to tell you, but
security.
That is true. That is true. If you're in cybersecurity, you are set for life. So, one quick thing, we have been talking about adware, but one of the biggest things that we all know it has been really catching the headlines this year is ransomware. And to your point before, you said these actors are going to go where the money is. I honestly, I'm not sure that I see big money in adware when they can throw ransomware out there and catch one person or one company that could possibly net them millions. So am I missing something here, or is adware really that big a moneymaker when ransomware is out there looming as kind of the headline grabber as far as big payouts are concerned?
Sure. And I think so the kind of the big payout technique you're referring to is that of big game hunting, where, an adversary gets on a network, hides, manages to spread out, and then just encrypts a ton of computers all at once, right? And then demands a payout. This has not been something we've seen in the Mac OS world yet, at least not something that's been reported in terms of a major, a bunch of Macs got encrypted. There has been ransomware for Macs. We have seen it developed. Another example of that, the XCS set malware that I just referenced had built-in ransomware features. Nobody reported on them being used on their system or being initiated, but we have seen developers interested in that. When it comes to the approaches, from the Windows environment, they are similar. The attacker probably will delete a bunch of backups if it can find any and encrypt the files on the computer. But when it comes to corporate environments, again, as we see that market share kind of shift, I think it is something we'll have to worry about. But a lot of times those big game hunting actors, they have a lot of tooling built, I would imagine, for Windows, and it doesn't seem as common for Mac just yet. Maybe Patrick has a different answer. I'm not sure.
Just to build on that and to kind of circle back to your question, I think they're just two separate ways to make money. I mean, like the hunting analogy that Jaron mentioned, right? If you hit that big corporation and successfully infect a large number of computers, you're going to have a multi-million-dollar payout. And so, yeah, that's super, appealing to these adversaries. But at the same time, that's probably very difficult. Companies now are somewhat better in their cybersecurity posture. As Jaron mentioned, there's more tools and techniques that need to be employed. Whereas, adware is really this, kind of very opportunistic. Let's just, go after as many users. And then, each system might add $1, but if you hack 1 million systems, well, you might be generating, $1 million over some period of time. So I think it's just two separate approaches. I think also the adware industry operates a little bit more in a gray area where it's like, well, the user clicked allow, so they didn't really score, where legally I'm not culpable. So adversaries, that might be also appealing to them, where they can operate in this quasi-legal state versus ransomware, which is, okay, you're going to have the FBI, the NSA, and the US government now coming after you. Right. So I really think it's both. And I think this is why they're both ever more prolific, and unfortunately here to stay. Is when we started the conversation talking about money, so much money can be made off corporations, off individual users. And so, these adware groups, these ransomware groups are just going to continue to unfortunately target and be successful.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. I feel like we could just keep going on and on and on about this, because it really is a conversation that just can take so many different twists and turns throughout. I don't think we'd ever actually exhaust it. But to your point, it is job security, if nothing else. So Patrick and Jaron, thank you both for having the conversation with me. I do appreciate it. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, and look forward to next time. And until then, stay safe. I always like to end by saying, users, make sure you install the latest version of the software, use a password management, and just, kind of that, really best practices when you're browsing the web. And that really will put you in the top, arguably 5% in terms of security, and really likely will ensure that you remain secure.
And hopefully your Mac will remain virus-free and we'll live to see another day, basically. So
exactly, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And then, if I may add as well, we'll be starting tomorrow. Jamf is having our JNUC conference, where my team and I will be we'll have presentations talking about some of the trends we've seen in Mac OS malware this year, as well as some of the research Patrick and I have done on specific malware samples. So. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, by the time this runs on Techstrong TV, that will have passed, but I'm sure it'll be available on demand.
There will be, there'll be replays that you'll be able to find as well.
Awesome.
Definitely.
All right. Great. Well, gentlemen, again, thank you both for your time and your expertise. Enjoyed the conversation immensely.
Thank you. Chat soon.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. We have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I've handpicked 3 for you to let you know about so that you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called Progressive Release Management is the Key to DevOps. This one is happening Tuesday, November 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Platora. Release management originated to reduce risk. There were multiple teams who needed to work together seamlessly, and someone needed to manage the dependencies between them. Now, as pipelines automate more and more risk out of the equation, CABs and other existing processes are keeping organizations from increasing their DevOps capabilities. And to overcome this, stay relevant, and unstick your DevOps evolution, release management needs to change. This webinar looks at the new progressive release management capabilities of the Platora Value Stream Management Platform and how you can leverage it to provide more value to your organization throughout its DevOps evolution. So some of the key takeaways include how to unstick your DevOps with value stream flow and DevOps metrics, how to become an insight-driven progressive release manager, and how to achieve business objectives by following IT initiative trends. Going to be a good one, folks. The second one is called Techstrong Panel, SRE. This one is happening Wednesday, November 17th at noon Eastern on DevOps.com. This is a panel discussion providing some guidance based on the experiences of what successful companies are doing to proactively identify areas for improvement and provide people with the autonomy to implement solutions by bridging the gap between developers and operations. Panelists on this webinar include Kevin Keeney of Everbridge, Pradeep Padala of Filament, Justin McCarthy of Strong DM, and Anthony Evans of StackState. This is going to be a really fascinating conversation between four very, very smart people and who have direct experience with SREs. Definitely one worth checking out if you've got the time and inclination. The last webinar is called Modern Ransomware. How we got here and where we're going. This one is happening Thursday, November 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This is sponsored by Rubrik. This webinar takes a look at how attacks have evolved to exploit COVID-19, the pandemic, and what most successful organizations have done to defend against them. So some of the key takeaways will include what the future of ransomware looks like and how you can stay ahead of the curve, why data protection will become the most critical element of your security strategy, and how to make backups that rescue you from attack. Another very, very relevant webinar indeed. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me tomorrow and I'll have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope you have a great day and please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, we are back. Next up, we've got Mitch Ashley in his Analyst Corner segment. He speaks with Jason Needham, who is the CEO of Cloud Entity, and they discuss the findings of a state of API security study that Cloud Entity recently did. It's a really relevant survey recognizing the importance that APIs play in application development and connecting systems and the increased threat landscape that APIs have actually, unfortunately, kind of created. So this is a great conversation, very relevant, and the results of the survey are very, very insightful as well. So definitely give this conversation a listen. Let's get to it right now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jaron Bradley, who is a Mac OS detections lead expert at Jamf. That is a mouthful. And Patrick Wardle, who is an Apple security expert and founder of Objective-C. Jaron and Patrick, thank you both for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. It's great to see you both.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So I want to talk to you about malware because really nobody's talking about malware these days, right? But it is a huge topic, especially among the cybersecurity crowds and to a much larger extent these days to regular folk. As people actually understand what malware is and how it can impact an organization, I'm interested in finding out from you guys what you guys are seeing on the landscape. Did you guys put out some research lately or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we publish, kind of trends and overviews of what we're seeing. Jaren and I both focus in the Apple arena, specifically Mac OS, but there's some really interesting trends that have kind of come to the forefront in the last year or so. And really one of the main things we're seeing is Macs are becoming ever more popular, ever more prevalent, especially in the enterprise. People are now working from home. People love their Mac computers. They're becoming ever more popular. And unfortunately, kind of in lockstep with the increased popularity of Mac OS, we're seeing Mac malware also emerge on the scene and, equally gain in popularity. And this is really unsurprising. Hackers are very opportunistic. And as there are more Macs out there, as I mentioned, especially in the enterprise, there's going to be more targets. And so one of the main trends we're seeing is not just this uptick of Mac malware and Mac adware, but also that adversaries are taking their malware that was originally written for another platform, for example, Windows, and then port that over so it can natively run on Mac OS. And again, this to me really just shows that the hackers, the malware authors are aware of trends of what's popular and are making sure that their malicious creations are compatible with whatever users are using. In this case, a lot more Mac systems these days.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think also to build on top of what Patrick's saying a little bit, we've even seen some of your more basic malware, things like pups or adware over the years. Some of the research that we posted and some of the research Patrick and I dug into was a piece of adware that had actually modified itself to be incredibly more sophisticated by abusing zero-day vulnerabilities within it that allowed it to bypass a lot of Apple's security checks. So even some of this more less threatening, you might consider adware that a lot of users might kind of ignore and think, that's just kind of bland adware. Even that's getting more and more sophisticated.
It's interesting that we're still having a conversation about adware. I feel like 10 years ago, this would have been a relevant conversation, and we're still having it today. And I have to wonder, is it because that type of malware is, it still works among, your average user, maybe people who are not so tech savvy, don't really have their finger on the cybersecurity pulse, as it were. Because I feel like the cybersecurity sector in general has progressed so far past adware, but here we are having this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting that it continues to stick around. As long as there's financially motivated attackers, you'll continue to see adware. When in reality, a lot of times what ends up on your computer is just software you don't want there that's taking up space on your browser or whatever it be. Ultimately, like adware has no reason to be written well, right? Its goal is just to get ads in front of you. And that often leads to bogging down your system and slowing things down and stuff like that. But like I said, as long as we have financially motivated attackers, we'll continue to see that. And on the Mac OS platform specifically, we see a lot of adware. When it comes to users installing things they shouldn't, adware is definitely very abundant on Mac OS. And kind of one of our philosophies is if these adware authors are able to get on so many different systems, if they're able to get installed on so many different users' systems, some of the more advanced attackers, like you can imagine what their capabilities are as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think Jaren really hit the nail on the head. It's really about financial gain. There's just so much money to be made. Adware authors are spending a ton of time and resources making sure that their malicious creations can run effectively on Mac OS. So we're actually seeing some impressive innovations, and I say that as a malware author, malware analyst, in the sense that, we're really seeing innovations in the adware space where, for example, Jaren mentioned they sometimes introduce zero-day vulnerabilities specifically to work around Apple's security mechanisms. And the reason there's so much money to be made and so much money to be lost when Apple, for example, introduces a new security mechanism that may thwart their infection vectors. So when there's so much money on the table, it's really unsurprising that they continue to push, and they're very, very capable, very sophisticated of how they're able to get onto end user systems. And as Jared mentioned, sometimes even leverage zero-day vulnerabilities, which are security issues that there are no patch for yet. So it's kind of an interesting trend to see the sophistication of adware continue to increase.
So, I'm a very, very long time Mac user. Love it. I've like drank the apple Kool-Aid, and I've got
the apple juice.
The apple juice. There we go. The apple juice. I like that. But, one of the reasons why I loved it when I first adopted it was because it seemed so much more secure than Windows. And we were hearing about Windows vulnerabilities left and right, but Apple seemed to be bulletproof. But clearly that has changed. So why? I mean, what has happened besides the increasing prevalence of Mac OS machines in the workplace? Why is it that we are now hearing so much more about Mac vulnerabilities and the abundance of malware infecting Mac machines?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I really like to talk about because I think it's really important for users to understand the risks that face them and also the security, or rather insecurity, of their devices, so they understand the reality and what proactive steps they can take to protect themselves. So various components, various pieces, but the short answer is that Apple really did a great job on the marketing side, essentially convincing us all that Macs didn't get malware. Recently, as 5 or 6 years ago, if you went to apple.com, there was, verbiage on the website saying Macs don't get Windows viruses. And that's a very nuanced statement. You could argue, yes, Windows viruses don't run on Mac, but the takeaway that people consumed from that was Macs don't get viruses, which really was the intention of Apple's marketing department. And kudos to them. I mean, they did an incredible job. Apple is an incredibly valuable company, and the average Mac user still thinks their Mac system is secure. But the reality is it never was. But as you mentioned, because of the fact that Macs weren't that common, the average Mac user didn't encounter maybe adware or malware because all the hackers and malware writers were focusing on Windows platform. I mean, Windows had 90% of the marketplace. Why would hackers spend any other time elsewhere? So now we're coming back to the fact that Macs are becoming ever more prevalent and hackers are starting to switch or really kind of change their focus. And the reality is macOS is just as vulnerable as any other operating system. It's not magically more secure, regardless of what Apple says. So it's really important for users to realize that, because if they believe Apple's marketing propaganda, they are actually going to be more at risk because they will not take those precautions, for example, when they're browsing the internet or downloading email attachments from untrusted sources. So it's really important for them to understand, hey, there are risks out there that are able to infect Mac systems, even fully patched ones. So, regardless of what Apple says, maybe run third-party security tools, maybe be extra careful, and really take some personal responsibility to make sure that your system doesn't become hacked. And so I think it's a really important message that users need to hear, because what's coming out of Cupertino is sometimes a lot of just marketing hype.
Yeah. And then once again, to build on top of what Patrick's saying, one of my favorite examples of this is there's a book called The Cuckoo's Egg, written by Clifford Stoll. This is about an attack that happened. Honestly, I think it was 70s or 80s. I can't even remember, but it was an attack, a targeted attack on like the Berkeley network, where secrets were being stolen off there, like different trademark work, stuff like that. And this was all off of Linux systems, which, today you think Linux and you're like, oh, nobody's using Linux. It must be like super secure, right? But back then, like Linux was everywhere. It's what people, it's where all these servers were that were holding these different files that users could share and build on. So this whole, this early targeted attack was focused on Linux because at the time, once again, it was where the market share was at. It's where the good data was at. For so long, the market leader has been Windows, right? It's been so high up that that's what people have been going after. But like these early attacks from the cuckoo's egg that were documented are just kind of evidence that like the attackers are going to go after wherever the market share is. And as Mac continues to grow in popularity, we're going to continue to see more and more malware for that.
Yeah, it's sad. I guess I have to say that, it's, one of the things that I thought I could always count on was the fact that my Mac is secure, but I guess not so much. So, so two things regarding that. First of all, you mentioned Linux, which is obviously open source. And we've been hearing a lot about the software supply chain issues coming, over the last 12 to 18 months or so. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of open source software that's being used these days, or open source code. Do you guys see anything? I mean, obviously SolarWinds was a big example of cyber threat actors taking advantage of a vulnerability in code. But do you guys see that as just kind of a general trend, as the use of open source software being an attack vector for or for cyber threat actors moving forward? I mean, are they going to like pinpoint target those vulnerabilities and exploit them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I really think if we put on our black hats and think as adversaries for a second, it's really the best way to infect a large number of targets. If you can, infect a package manager or a website that's distributing software, you can perhaps hit thousands and tens of thousands of systems without having to individually target those. And that's exactly what the SolarWinds adversaries did. And that was kind of why they took that approach. On macOS, we have seen instances where popular third-party application websites have been compromised, and then the adversaries, the hackers, were able to manipulate some of the packages that were available there. I think it's really important to note that this isn't specific to open source software. I mean, yes, some of the attacks do fall that. But for example, I believe SolarWinds was just a third-party security product that their servers had been compromised, and the software that was being distributed was actually pre-compiled, which in retrospect made it more difficult to detect. One good thing that's worth pointing out, at least on the Apple platform and the Apple ecosystem, is something called notarization. And what Apple has done is said, in order for software to run on recent versions of macOS, it has to have Apple's specific stamp of approval. So the idea is software developers have to submit their applications to Apple, and Apple will scan it for malicious code and essentially then only approve it once it's gone through this process. So in theory, this should at least stymie supply chain attacks against macOS, because even if adversaries are able to infect an open source software package or a third-party website that's distributing compiled applications that users might go to and inadvertently download, these will not be notarized, so macOS won't run them. Of course, notarization is not perfect. We've seen vulnerabilities and ways to skirt this, but it's a really good step in the right direction, and will essentially force adversaries, again, in the macOS space, to submit their subverted payloads to Apple to get the stamp of approval before they can pull off this supply chain attack. So it kind of forces Apple into the middle of it, and so they can scan and verify software. So again, not foolproof, not a panacea, not a silver bullet, but a good step in the right direction. On other platforms, I'm not sure the security mechanisms that are in place, but as I mentioned, it's such an incredibly powerful attack vector. We're likely to see adversaries, continuing that. I'm sure every ransomware group, hacker group took notes, copious notes about the SolarWinds attack and said, wow, this is a really powerful infection vector that allows us to hit tons of targets. So, why wouldn't they continue to try to pull off such attacks?
Yeah. And two like very specific examples that come to mind quickly are just even as relatively recently, Patrick and I both looked at a malware sample that ultimately got labeled Zuru malware, right? ZURU. And this was
that, Jaron.
That actually Patrick came up with that name as well. So
awesome.
There you go. You're talking to the guy. But basically, it would take it took an open source project, iTerm, not mistaken. And this is for like, a lot of usually power users, iTerm people running commands on computers and to get results. Basically took that, added some malicious code to it, and then hosted it on the internet and managed to get where if you went to like some Chinese search engines and punched in iTerm download, you would get this result before you would get the legitimate one.
Wow.
And then people could download this, install it. It would operate just like the normal iTerm, but instead it would also do stuff in the background that the user would be none the wiser about. A second example would be the XCS set malware that was discovered in 2021. It might have been August 2020 on its initial discovery, now that I think about it, but it's updated over the years and stayed very recent. Its goal is to infect actual developer systems when they're building applications. And when they build those applications to aim and try and release them to other users, it aims to kind of infect the user's apps. So they're unknowingly distributing applications that might have been infected in some manner. And it's and these are the more sophisticated attacks we're going to continue to see more and more of, I think.
Yeah, I don't really like to hear that. I got to tell you, but
security.
That is true. That is true. If you're in cybersecurity, you are set for life. So, one quick thing, we have been talking about adware. But one of the biggest things that we all know it has been really catching the headlines this year is ransomware. And to your point before, you said these actors are going to go where the money is. I honestly, I'm not sure that I see big money in adware when they can like throw ransomware out there and catch one person or one company that could possibly net them millions. So am I missing something here, or is adware really that big a moneymaker when ransomware is out there looming as kind of the headline grabber as far as big payouts are concerned?
Sure. And I think so the kind of the big payout technique you're referring to is that of big game hunting, where an adversary gets on a network, hides, manages to spread out, and then just encrypts a ton of computers all at once, right? And then demands a payout. This has not been something we've seen in the Mac OS world yet, at least not something that's been reported in terms of a major, like a bunch of Macs got encrypted. There has been ransomware for Macs. We have seen it developed. Another example of that, the XCS set malware that I just referenced had built-in ransomware features. Nobody reported on them being used on their system or being like initiated, but we have seen developers interested in that. When it comes to the approaches, like from the Windows environment, they are similar. The attacker probably will delete a bunch of backups if it can find any and encrypt the files on the computer. But when it comes to corporate environments, again, as we see that market share kind of shift, I think it is something we'll have to worry about. But a lot of times those big game hunting actors, they have a lot of tooling built, I would imagine, for Windows, and it doesn't seem as common for Mac just yet. Maybe Patrick has a different answer. I'm not sure.
Just to build on that and to kind of circle back to your question, I think they're just two separate ways to make money. I mean, like the hunting analogy that Jaron mentioned, right? If you hit that big corporation and successfully infect a large number of computers, you're going to have a multi-million-dollar payout. And so, that's super, appealing to these adversaries. But at the same time, that's probably very difficult. Companies now are somewhat better in their cybersecurity posture. As Jaron mentioned, there's more tools and techniques that need to be employed. Whereas, adware is really this, kind of very opportunistic. Let's just, go after as many users. And then, each system might add $1. But if you hack 1 million systems, well, you might be generating, $1 million over some period of time. So I think it's just two separate approaches. I think also the adware industry operates a little bit more in a gray area where it's like, well, the user clicked allow, so they didn't really score, where legally I'm not culpable. So adversaries, that might be also appealing to them, where they can operate in this quasi-legal state versus ransomware, which is, okay, you're going to have the FBI, the NSA, and the US government now coming after you. Right. So I really think it's both. And I think this is why they're both ever more prolific and unfortunately here to stay. Is when we started the conversation talking about money, so much money to be made off corporations, off individual users. And so, these adware groups, these ransomware groups are just going to continue to unfortunately target and be successful.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. I feel like we could just keep going on and on and on about this because it really is a conversation that just can take so many different twists and turns throughout. I don't think we'd ever actually exhaust it. But to your point, it is job security, if nothing else. So Patrick and Jaron, thank you both for having the conversation with me. I do appreciate it. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, and look forward to next time. And until then, stay safe. I always like to end by saying, users, make sure you install the latest version of the software, use a password management, and just, kind of that, really best practices when you're browsing the web. And that really will put you in the top, arguably 5% in terms of security, and really likely will ensure that you remain secure.
And hopefully your Mac will remain virus-free and we'll live to see another day, basically. So
exactly, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And then, if I may add as well, we'll be starting tomorrow. Jamf is having our JNUC conference where my team and I will be we'll have presentations talking about some of the trends we've seen in Mac OS malware this year, as well as some of the research Patrick and I have done on specific malware samples. So. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, by the time this runs on Techstrong TV, that will have passed, but I'm sure it'll be available on demand.
There will be, there'll be replays that you'll be able to find as well.
Awesome. Definitely. All right. Great. Well, gentlemen, again, thank you both for your time and your expertise. Enjoyed the conversation immensely.
Thank you. Chat soon.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, welcome back. Rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have The View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Alexis Richardson, who is the CEO of Weaveworks, and they discuss how GitOps will give rise to application stores in the enterprise. And that is a really interesting topic, and it's a really interesting conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Alexis Richardson, who is the CEO for Weaveworks, and we're talking about app stores in the enterprise. This doesn't sound like a new concept, but there's a lot going on apparently around Kubernetes and GitOps and a changing mindset, as it were. Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mike. Great to be here.
The notion of an app store has been around for some time. Vendors have them. There's more app stores than I can shake a stick at. Why do you think that enterprises have either missed that opportunity or should be thinking about how they create their own app store?
So I guess I don't think they've missed the opportunity, to be clear. I think it's still ahead of them. What I was thinking about was whether or not the technology we have today is enough to get us closer to an app store capability. And this goes hand in hand with questions I get a lot from people looking at the space, which is Kubernetes important? Is it different from OpenStack? How is it different from what came before that? Should I care at all? And I think you should care, because we're in the middle of a big technology change, which is a bit like when the World Wide Web came about in the 1990s, that was about having a common technology infrastructure that vendors and end users, as we call them, could all use and share to share content online. And that led to a technology stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, the so-called lab stack. And people like Amazon built businesses on top of this. And then we had the mobile phone. And so people say, are we at the, with mobile technology, it took us 10 years to get to the iPhone. Have we had the iPhone moment for Kubernetes? And the answer is no, not yet. It's actually 1995 right now. We're in the middle of the second wave of this new technology, and the technology still sucks in lots of ways. We still see people building their own Kubernetes distributions like we used to see people building their own Linux distributions. When I first got into the industry, it was a point of pride to make your own computer. And then about 5 or 10 years later, people just stopped doing that because it was clearly not a very good use of time. And so I wonder where we are in the second revolution. I see things like, the cloud has obviously grown and grown. It's now heading into the enterprise with things like Azure Arc and Amazon EKS Anywhere and Anthos from Google. Plus, 5G is this really fast communications network that's coming up all around us. And 5G is just the beginning. There's going to be a 6G and a 7G and an 8G. And I promise you, we'll be sitting around with more gray hairs saying, why is 8G better than 7G one day? But actually, 5G does represent a genuine step up, like DSL after being on 9.6 phone dial-in board for some time. So we're going to see a lot more distributed compute and things like telco towers where these phones connect to. Each one of those is going to be a mini data center, whether it's got 3 or 5 or 10 computers in it. They're all going to join up to form one day just a continuous fabric of compute. And on top of that, you'll have applications, you'll have games, you'll have robots, and all these things will provide us with benefits like healthcare, movies, fun, and of course also business and government and other utilities and so on. So I think we're very, very early in that journey, actually. So then I begin to think, well, what could we do next? And thinking about that iPhone moment, I remember the App Store was a big thing for me because you could take 2 phones, buy them on the same day from the same store, and I could give one to you, Mike, and I could keep one. And then we could both download the same app onto our phone from the App Store. And the way it works is we go to one store, which is maintained by Apple or Google or somebody. We download one app, each onto our phones, and then we're running the same thing. And we know we're running the same thing. So I can say, Mike, you're using the same app as me. And we can work together sharing things that app lets us do, whether it's photos or planning a meal or something. And then the question is, can you do this with enterprise software? And the answer is, hell no. If you take, let's just say we start on Amazon or any reliable cloud, we decided to pick an availability zone, and we each decide to start Kubernetes using the local service, and they all have good services at this point. We each start a Kubernetes cluster, and we start putting things on it. Do we have the same cluster? I have no idea if your cluster is the same as mine 5 minutes after we've booted our 2 clusters. So we're a long way from App Store fidelity with enterprise compute because the technologies may diverge. So I thought, can GitOps help? And the answer is GitOps guarantees identical clusters and identical add-ons around that, identical apps. And it tells you if either of the 2 drift away from the model that lives in Git, the config. And so we can actually give each other enterprise apps on Kubernetes and be running the same application. And I thought that's actually pretty useful. That takes us one step closer to the App Store. So then I went to talk to a bunch of ISVs, people who sell software apps to big enterprises. I asked them, is it hard to get your app installed on the enterprise? And they're like, yes, that's one of the biggest problems about being an ISV is everybody has different infrastructure. Wouldn't it be great if we could all just agree on Kubernetes or we could all just agree on something else? And obviously that doesn't happen on its own, but what we have seen is that people have been converging on the Kubernetes-based solution. So maybe that could be how containerized apps are all delivered for ISVs in the future. So maybe big ISVs, whether it's UiPath or somebody else, can deliver quite large business applications in a standard way using containers, because it has that idempotence and that fidelity, so that we know that Mike and Alexis both install their app. We're running the same app, which was not true a few years ago. So I'm fascinated by this. I think that it's not necessarily enough that it's going to cure enterprise software, but I think we can see already that there is real power in the tools that gives us hope that one day enterprise software may not be as complicated as it has been, and maybe more like the convenience of the self-service world of the phone. So that's really the basis of my question. And why I spoke at GitOps Day is about this.
I think that we all have the notion of a repository for containers so far, and we've been kind of doing reusability of that at a Git level. I think what you're trying to say is there's a higher level of abstraction to think about. But how do we know what the relationships are between all the different containers that might make up an application? And how do I keep track of that and manage all that?
What if I have two containers and they have to be connected in some way? You know, if Kubernetes can configure that relationship, or more generally, the cloud native stack, let's call it that, if that can configure that relationship, then I can compare what's running with my configuration, and I can do so constantly. So I can do the so-called reconciliation loop, which is part of GitOps. It's also part of infrastructure as code. It's the basic idea behind Puppet and Chef. You know, whatever is under management is continuously reconciled with what is in the model. So if I can describe those multiple pieces in your example, then I can say we're running the same thing.
I feel at least that we've been talking about this whole notion of continuous delivery, and that's part and parcel of this store, because at some point you got to update these applications. Yet we're not so good at continuous delivery. We're good at the CI side of the equation, but how do we get better with continuous delivery and Git and all these other things to achieve what you're describing?
So CI is amazing. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're saying, does this mean my CI is out of date? The answer is probably not. If you've got tons of Jenkins, I would say carry on using it. If you're on GitHub Actions or GitLab runners, go for it. Those are great too. And there's so much else out there. CI is very well understood and works very, very well. Where we've been going wrong is we've been trying to use CI for operations. And the first sign of that is when you let CI take control of deployment. And that basically means when you say to the CI system, hey, I want to deploy, let's think of an example, something like Alfresco, a content management system. I want to do a deployment of a new version of Alfresco, and that's going to involve 15 different changes to 15 different pieces. They have to be done in a specific order. Sometimes I have to wait until one thing finishes before I start the next thing. And if anything goes wrong, I guess I just keep going and hope that I'm going to finish. But actually, normally what happens with those situations is the CI might get stuck because one component fails. It doesn't have the ability to know how to keep going because it doesn't have a plan against which to measure the success or failure of the operations it's been carrying out. So what we realized was that you can use Kubernetes to implement that plan. So Kubernetes is already an orchestration tool. It sits there. It has a plan of what it's supposed to be doing. And the reconciliation loops inside it are continuously checking against that plan, which lives in etcd, and making sure that everything works correctly. So we just expanded that concept to more stuff. So deployment for GitOps is when the CI tool generates a new ready-to-deploy artifact. And then the reconciliation loop living inside the runtime goes, aha, they've put a new image in the image repo for me. Or, oh, look, the config has changed. That means I'm now behind schedule. I need to go and get the new thing, pull it in, and now I'm back up to date again. And this way, we can do deployment, except the deployment is managed by the orchestrator. Why is this better? Well, first of all, it's more secure. Nobody's touching production directly. They're just putting things in repos. Secondly, it's autonomous, which means it scales. I can have this happening with tens of thousands of clusters in parallel, if potentially, or millions of namespaces, all kinds of things like that. And thirdly, it has the Kubernetes property of convergence. You've heard of eventual consistency. Once you've got the plan, you can Kubernetes will keep trying until the system is aligned with the plan. And then it's happy again. The orchestrator says, job done, I'll just keep going. And there are other benefits like drift alerts. So, if you go into an enterprise and ask them, is your cluster in the right state? And most people will say, I have no idea what that question even means. And the answer is, wouldn't it be nice if you were told when your cluster and your app had drifted away from the right state, and then they automatically try to fix it? And again, that comes from the same reconciliation magic that I talked about before. So that's all deployment in GitOps.
So at its simplest level, instead of using the CI system to push code out to these platforms, we're going to let the orchestration platform pull code when it's ready or when it detects that there's a change or something that's interesting.
Correct.
Is that where the shift is?
Correct. Although actually in reality, it's both push and pull. This has been a source of confusion because I used to say it was either push or pull, and that confused people. What's really happening is the CI tool is pushing correct changes into the repos. And then the deployment orchestration is pulling the correct artifacts out of the repos and loading them into the running system. So it's a push me, pull you, if you remember that from Dr. Doolittle.
All right. It's more like the yin and yang of Kubernetes, right? I get both sides of this
thing. It is the yin and yang of Kubernetes. Exactly.
Right. What do you think is the big challenge for people to have this aha moment to get to that enterprise app store that you were talking about from where they are today?
I mean, let's face it. For most people, IT is highly regulated with different regulations in different companies, places, and regimes. Many tools are being used because they were bought a long time ago and hasn't been the money or the inclination to change them or for some other reason. So enterprise IT is kind of the world where you can't turn things off, you can't delete things. It's a bit of you always build on top of that. So I think that's a challenge for the enterprise app store because, the whole idea of these phones now is if I don't like this thing, I can throw it in the bin and go and buy another one. Or I can wipe it and reinstall everything. Or I can delete the apps if I don't like them. And that's a different world. So that's very, very challenging. And if you go and talk to people in the real world about this, they're struggling to get basic apps stood up on Kubernetes. They're struggling to get Kubernetes hooked up to Jenkins. They're struggling to get DevOps to do more than so many releases a day because SecOps said they couldn't do more than 5 releases a day because it was insecure. Or, everybody said, hey, we're going to have a new golden image of Linux every Monday, and everybody has to roll their applications onto it. And it's kind of like, whoa, hang on a minute. Do you know what that means? I'm running a Kubernetes cluster. You want me to roll a new image into that? There's lots of questions. So there's a sort of clash between two worlds. As always with technical change, there's a new world where things are done a bit differently, and there's an old world. And what most people struggle with is deciding what to keep and what to throw away as they evolve their practices. So I'd say that's the number one challenge is, I've got a working system and I know where I want to be. I see the flag on the hill, but what do I do first? Do I do containers? Do I look at my CI/CD? Do I start playing with Kubernetes in the cloud? And that's when I think education and training is really, really important in this industry. And that's one of the things that's overall you can see holding people back. It's just the lack of good information, good skills, and so on. And it will change. But remember, we're in 1995, we're still building Linux and putting it on our own computers at the moment.
Do you think people are still intimidated by Kubernetes and the platform? And part of what you're describing is a maturity curve. Once I get exposed to Kubernetes and I get to appreciate how powerful it is, then I discover these capabilities. But does it just take time for organizations to get what you just described to?
Completely. Absolutely. That is it. 100%. I also think that as with any new technology, you have hype. And then you have people telling you that you can solve all the problems in the world with Kubernetes. We will cure cancer, we will cure global warming, we will make each other happy with Kubernetes. And we call this hubris. But obviously, it's not the case. What happens is, and this is, I think Gartner do a good job with their hype cycle concept here. You have this initial euphoric rush. This is a powerful tool. I can do a lot with it. And then it's, oh shit, actually, maybe I don't want to do everything with this, but I do want to do these things. And that's when, the industry matures, is when you've got enough people familiar with the tool. It takes a few years.
All right, folks. So I think what Alexis is saying here is that at the end of your career, you should aspire to become a shopkeeper at the end of the day, right? Once you get there, that will be the end state of the perfect thing, because I'm going to run a store and I'm going to manage that, and the store is going to be full of a lot of distributed code, and hopefully you'll know where all the dependencies are, right?
Well, it'll be an 8G enterprise store, yeah.
All right, sounds good. Hey, Alexis, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much, Mike. It was good to be here.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back. That rounds out today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, as always. Just a couple quick reminders before we close things out. First of all, we have the Low Code, No Code event happening this Thursday. It is a virtual event, and it has an amazing lineup of speakers and a top-notch agenda. Definitely want to check this one out if you're even remotely interested in what low code has to offer. That one, as I said, is a virtual event. You can go on techstrongevents.com to register for it. Also, upcoming December 1st, we have a live event in OTech, Oklahoma City, and I'm going to make my first trip to Oklahoma City for that one, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a great one-day conference that covers all things IT related, including DevOps and cybersecurity. Lots of great speakers lined up for that event, so I hope you can join us there. And then finally, we have the FinCon DX Virtual Summit. That is happening December 9th. Again, that is another virtual event. This one is geared toward the financial services community, but as I always say, there are a lot of takeaways for any industry in these virtual events. So definitely you want to check this one out too. All three of them, as I said before, you can go to techstrongevents.com to check out the events themselves. Look at the homepage, look at the agenda, look at the list of speakers, and register for the events themselves. Also, a quick reminder, we will have a new show tomorrow, but on Thursday, when we normally have a new show, we're actually going to be live streaming from the Qualys event that's happening in Las Vegas this week. We're actually live streaming Wednesday and Thursday of this week. So you won't see me here on Thursday, but I will be back on Monday, the following Monday, with a fresh new show for you. And until then, I guess I get a few days off. Right, like I get a day off. But anyway, I'm kidding. I will see you back on Monday here on Techstrong TV. Until then, actually, I'll see you tomorrow on Techstrong TV. But until then, have a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.